Chapter 244. When Xin Yuan Pa discovered that it was a real dragon, he was indeed very frightened. However, this wasn't enough to make him faint. The real reason he fainted was because the black dragon had released some of its dragon's might. As a member of the Yao clan, Xin Yuan Pa had no way of resisting this ancient and terrifying aura. A gust of wind rose, and Jin Yulu appeared. His clothes made a slight fluttering sound in the air, and he looked around cautiously. He felt the terrifying aura from the gatehouse and rushed over as fast as he could. Li Palace appointed Chun Chong Sheng as the principal of Orthodox Academy. Did it really attract a peerless expert? But when he arrived at the kitchen, he found nothing but Xin Yuan Pa, who had fainted on the floor. He asked in a low voice, "What happened?" "It's nothing," Chun Chong Sheng said. "When I was helping to unclog his meridians, my true essence was a bit reversed. I'll be fine after a short rest." Jin Yulu frowned slightly. He felt that Chun Chong Sheng's expression was a bit unnatural, but he really didn't feel the terrifying aura. He checked and left. Chun Chong Sheng put his hand on his chest and let out a sigh of relief. He squatted down and woke Xin Yuan Po up. Xin Yuan Po's face was full of fear. He looked around, and his face was very pale. At the Ivy League gathering, facing the infamous Tian Haya heir, this Yao youngster could show extraordinary courage and bravery, but the scene he saw before was beyond his imagination. For Yao, the dragon's aura was innately terrifying. "Did you see a black dragon?" Xin Yuan Pa didn't see the existence that terrified him. Instead, he felt even more uneasy and his voice trembled. Chun Chong Sheng originally wanted to say that he was seeing things, but he knew that wouldn't convince him. After a moment of silence, he said, "That was looking for me. Don't tell anyone." Xin Yuan Pa pointed at him. His lips kept trembling. He couldn't say anything. After a long time, he finally said, "My God, who the hell are you?" Many people wanted to know who Chun Chong Sheng was, but he couldn't think of this, because in his eyes, this wasn't a problem. He was just a young Taoist from Xining Village's old temple. His master, Taoist Ji, may have a lot of secrets, but that didn't mean he had a lot of secrets. Of course, he now had a secret, and that was this black dragon. Returning to the small building, he placed the dagger on the display shelf and turned to walk to the table. Looking at the little black dragon, he used a long time to convince himself that this was not an illusion. It was only when he mustered up the courage to reach out and touch the black dragon's body that the cold feeling from his fingertips finally proved that all of this was real. The little black dragon clearly did not like his touch. With a slap, it slapped his palm away. What exactly is going on?" Chun Chong Sheng nervously asked. The little black dragon said nothing. She flew to the table, dipped some ink into the inkstone, and used her body as a brush to write a few words on the paper. This scene was very cute, but Chun Chong Sheng didn't care about this at this moment. He picked up the piece of paper and looked at it. Only then did he realize that it was a secret technique called soul separation. This kind of secret technique could allow a dragon's soul to temporarily separate from its huge body and transform into another appearance. It originated from the dragon's original human form transformation, but it was even more mysterious and difficult. But using this method, the dragon's soul could not leave the dragon's body too far, and there was a time limit. Moreover, it had to return to its original body, or else it would gradually fade away. Moreover, the dragon in this state was extremely weak, not even a 10,000th of its original strength. It even needed a human to protect it. Looking at the little black dragon in front of him, Chun Chong Sheng found it impossible to connect it with that mountainous black frost dragon in the underground space. "You just learned this secret technique yesterday, and today you want to go strolling around the capital with me?" He looked at the little black dragon and said in incomparable shock, "And you want me to be responsible for your safety?" The little black dragon floated in front of him and nodded. Chun Chong Sheng covered his forehead in speechlessness. After a while, he said with difficulty, "I want to go to the Garden of Zhou. I don't know what trouble I'll encounter. What if something happens?" The little black dragon said nothing, only quietly looked at him. Chun Chong Sheng's gaze met with its. He noticed that while the little black dragon's eyes seemed indifferent, There was a scorching heat hidden deep within. Only then did he realize that this black dragon had already been imprisoned in the capital for several hundred years. This was the first time it had come to the surface. Although it had not truly left, it had still left. And when it left the underground space, the first thing it did was to find him. He thought for a very long time, then said, "Okay, Gigi." Hearing his words, the little black dragon's eyes remained cold and noble, but it let out 2 squeaks. Chen Chongsheng knew that this was its laughter, so he also began to laugh. One by one, the monolith viewers left the mausoleum of books. Together with the ethereal opening cultivators and teachers from the various schools and sects, there were more than 100 people gathered in front of the stone pillars of the Li Palace, preparing to embark on the journey to the Garden of Zhou. There were even more cultivators that had already departed from the various parts of the continent, or perhaps had already arrived. A carriage pulled by a Pegasus slowly followed the divine avenue. Within the carriage was probably an important figure of the orthodoxy, responsible for this journey to the Garden of Zhou. Chen Chongsheng looked at the carriage, guessing at just who this important figure was, and why His Holiness and the Archbishop had not sent anyone to tell him. He looked at the carriage. There were many people looking at him, because he was now also an important figure of the orthodoxy. Chen Chongsheng did not have this kind of awareness. When the Archbishop of Temple Seminary brought the 3 students that were going to the Garden of Zhou to pay their respects, he was stunned for a very long time before reacting. Immediately afterwards, the teachers and students of the Heavenly Academy and the Li Palace College also came to pay their respects. Naturally, not everyone was willing to pay their respects to a 15-year-old youth, but with his current status, and this place just happened to be in front of the Li Palace, as a member of the orthodoxy, no one dared to make any mistakes in this aspect. Towards these matters, Chen Chongsheng had no experience, so he could only return their greetings one by one. Fortunately, he remembered the words of the Archbishop that night. Now, besides His Holiness and the Divine Empress, there was no one that deserved his full greeting. He did not need to lower his head, but his movements were unavoidably a little stiff, appearing especially reserved, without the bearing of an important figure. Zhixio stood expressionlessly at his side, not saying anything, because he was also not good at these things, so he could not help him. Liang Xiaoxiao, Qi Jian, and the 10 or so southern examinees that were participating in this year's grand examination stood on the opposite side, silently watching. When the procession to the Garden of Zhou left the capital, a melodious bell resounded from the depths of the Li Palace. Earlier, a red goose flew over from afar. This year's proclamation of azure clouds had officially been updated. Su Yurong, who had been at the proclamation of azure clouds for many years, was finally no longer on the proclamation. She had fallen onto the new proclamation of azure clouds. Liang Xiaoxiao and Qi Jian also left the proclamation of azure clouds. At the same time, the Pavilion of Divine Ordinance updated the proclamation of golden distinction. Unsurprisingly, Qiu Shanjun was still at the top of the proclamation. On the proclamation, Liang Xiaoxiao and Qi Jian appeared, as well as many young cultivators that had entered ethereal opening from viewing the monoliths in the Mausoleum of Books. What was unexpected was that Su Yurong was not on the proclamation of golden distinction, nor was Chen Chongsheng. Gohan Shi, Tang 36, and the other cultivators that were still within the Mausoleum of Books, according to the usual practice, the Pavilion of Divine Ordinance would not make an early judgment. However, Chen Chongsheng had already left the Mausoleum of Books, and Su Yurong had always been in the world, so why were they not on the proclamation? Taking advantage of yesterday's effort to adjust my biological clock, this is called being absent-minded. That's all for today. Chapter 245. Every time the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets issued a proclamation, it would add a brief comment. This time, the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets had probably anticipated that it would attract a lot of discussion. In the end, they also gave an explanation for why Su Yurong and Chen Chongsheng had not entered the proclamation of golden distinction. It indicated that this was because the Elder of Heavenly Secrets was looking forward to their journey to the Garden of Zhou. At this point, the entire continent knew that Chen Chongsheng and Su Yurong wanted to enter the Garden of Zhou. Starting from last year's Ivy League gathering, News of Qin Changsheng and Su Yurong's engagement had spread throughout the entire world. This story was brimming with all sorts of grievances, love and hatred, childhood sweethearts, counterattacks, and waiting. All of these were intertwined and difficult to describe. Now, the male and female leads of this story were finally going to meet in the Garden of Zhou. This naturally attracted the attention of countless people. As the other main character of this story, Qiu Shanjun didn't appear, but his junior brother did. Liang Xiaozhao's gaze towards Qin Changsheng became increasingly cold. Because of the time they had spent in the Mausoleum of Books, Qi Jian's opinion of Qin Changsheng had changed. Hearing the discussion, his small face also revealed an expression of indignation. Even if he had another fortuitous encounter in the Garden of Zhou, could it be that he could seize first place on the proclamation of golden distinction? Can he be compared to Qiu Shanjun? Why not? Although Qiu Shanjun has already succeeded in entering star condensation, don't forget that Qiu Shanjun is 4 years older than him. These discussions didn't mention Qin Changsheng's name, but everyone knew they were talking about him. Yi Shaoyin followed her senior to stand within the crowd, looking at Qin Changsheng's back in front of them. It wasn't like before. Her eyes were only filled with loathing and anger, only a little curiosity. Qin Changsheng felt the gazes from all around him, especially the expressions of the Southerners, which were obviously a little unfriendly. He felt a lot of pressure and a little confused. In the eyes of the world, he and Su Yurong may have been childhood sweethearts, may have had a love and hate relationship, but only he knew that none of this was real. He didn't know what Su Yurong looked like, and he believed that Su Yurong didn't have any impression of him. After exiting the south gate of the capital, the procession paused for a moment to rest. Officer Xian walked down from the carriage, pulled by the Pegasus at the very front, and came to Qin Changsheng. Qin Changsheng was a little surprised and asked, "Could it be that the bishop is leading the team?" Priest Xian shook his head and said, "The old master's health hasn't been good recently." Qin Changsheng looked at the carriage at the very front and asked curiously, "Which important figure of the orthodoxy is in that carriage?" Priest Xian looked at him and said with a smile, "I am here to invite you to board the train." Qin Changsheng stared blankly, only regaining his wits after a long while. Somewhat unsure, he said, "You're saying that I'll be leading the team to the Garden of Zhou?" Priest Xian sternly replied, "Yes, His Holiness the Pope has entrusted everything to you." Qin Changsheng thought back to the scene where the priests and teachers from pre-seminary and heavenly academy came to greet him. He was speechless and thought that he might be the last to know. After leaving the capital and arriving at Wenshui City, tinsum carriages passed through the city gate, the shafts of these carriages all bearing the insignia of the Li Palace. Several days ago, the Orthodox Church in the city had received the news and made arrangements. The guard at the city gate did not dare to conduct any inspections, so they had long since opened the gate. The two sides of the official road were packed with people who had heard the news and had come to watch. Who is Qin Changsheng? How many of the Divine Kingdom's 7 rules are here? Su Fengwang left directly from South Stream Temple. She can't be in the group, right? Which car is Qin Changsheng in? Could it be the first one? Oh, look at the wings of that Pegasus. It's snow white. It's about the same as our family's bed gauze. The crowd passionately discussed, pointing at the carriages in the group. That beautiful and mystical white Pegasus was naturally the focus of everyone's gazes. When the crowd knew that Qin Changsheng was in the first carriage, they surged forward. The street immediately became noisy, and people could even be heard shouting his name. A young Taoist from Xining village, well-versed in the Taoist canon, obtained first place upon the first banner of the grand examination, comprehended all 17 monoliths of the front mausoleum in a single day, and became the principal of the Orthodox Academy. No matter how one looked at it, this was a legend. He was a legend. Countless gazes fell on that carriage, burning with incomparable fervor, as if they wanted to burn through the curtains. Although he had the experience of being paraded through the streets of the capital after the grand examination, Qin Changsheng was still somewhat unused to this sort of treatment. He only felt that his face was boiling hot. On the other hand, Zhixiu, who sat across from him, remained expressionless. He was not affected in the slightest by the voices and the burning gazes coming from outside the carriage. The group heading for the Garden of Zhou went directly to Wenshui City's cathedral. Priest Xin led his subordinates to take care of the specific matters. As the principal of the Orthodox Academy, Chen Changsheng was nominally the leader of the group, so he did not need to do these things. In other words, he had the same significance as the door gods pasted on the door. The cathedral had already prepared rooms ahead of time, and the cultivators from the various schools and sects moved in. In recent years, the Mount Li Sword sect's reputation had been too resounding, so Qi Jian and Liang Xiaoxiao moved into the east courtyard. The two girls from Holy Maiden Peak lived next to them. Chen Changsheng naturally lived the best. The bishop of Wenshui City warmly invited him into the main hall, and Zhixiu obediently followed. After a simple cleaning, before he even had time to rest, a priest came to report that someone had come to visit Principal Chen. Chen Changsheng stared blankly, then guessed who it was. He hurriedly changed into a set of clean clothes and walked to the front of the hall. A man that looked like a steward stood in front of the hall. He was dressed in simple clothes, but the jade pendant tied to his waist was definitely not an ordinary object. Seeing Chen Changsheng, the steward bowed in greeting, seeming extremely respectful. Seeing this scene, the local priests of Wenshui City were all very shocked. The Wenshui Tangs had always been arrogant. Even the Tianhai clan and the Qiushan clan did not think much of them. This steward usually did not even give face to the bishop, so why was he acting so humble now? It must be known that the principal of the Orthodox Academy was only an empty position. His rank only had effect within the orthodoxy. Even if Chen Changsheng was on good terms with the sole grandson of the Tang clan, he would not have such a great deal of face. Chen Changsheng apologized to the Tang clan steward. Logically, as a junior, I should at least pay a visit to the old master. It's just that this trip to the Garden of Zhou is urgent, and His Holiness has given me the responsibility of leading the group, so it's inconvenient for me to leave. I asked the steward to pay my respects to the old master. Saying this, he took out a small case that he had prepared in the capital and handed it over. This case contained medicine. In the beginning, he and Tang 36 stole countless herbs and strange fruits from the 100 Herb Garden. In addition, Luo sent over the local products of the Red River, which were rarely seen in the human world. The priests of the Li Palace refined them into quite a few pills. Other than taking some when breaking into the ethereal opening realm, there was still a lot left. They weren't very effective in helping with cultivation, but they were best used to strengthen the body and prolong life. The steward took the small case and repeatedly expressed his thanks. Then he also took out a small case from his bosom and respectfully offered it up with both hands. He said that it was a greeting gift from the Tang Old Master to Principal Chen, and then he took his leave. Returning to the quiet room in the main hall, Chen Changsheng placed the case on the table and opened it. Inside the case was a round metal ball. This metal ball was about the size of a fist and seemed extremely heavy. Its surface was extremely smooth, but there were a few scale-like lines that divided the metal ball into 3 parts. Zhixiu walked to the table and glanced at it. His expression subtly changed, and then he fell silent for a very long time. Chen Changsheng looked at him and asked, "What's wrong? You seem very surprised." Zhixiu looked at him and asked, "Just what is your relationship with Tang 36? Confused, Chen Changsheng replied, "The two of us are friends." Yes, Tang 36 was the first friend he had made after entering the capital. "If you're just friends, why would the Tang clan give this treasure to you?" Zhixiu expressionlessly said. Chen Changsheng extended his hand and took out the seemingly ordinary metal ball from the case. He carefully examined it, but he did not see anything special about it. "What is this thing?" Zhixiu walked in front of him and looked at the metal ball. His usually emotionless eyes now showed a strange emotion. The defensive arrays of the various kingdoms of the human world were all designed and manufactured by the Tang clan. The best weapons and armaments were also all designed and manufactured by the Tang clan. The armor of the 38 divine generals of the continent was also all designed and manufactured by the Tang clan. Even White Emperor City, which was surrounded by the Red River, was said to have been personally designed and constructed by the ancestors of the Tang clan. This clan that had existed by the banks of the Wenshui River for 1,000 generations was so rich that even the divine empress was somewhat fearful of it, unable to act against it. The treasure of the Wenshui Tangs was naturally no ordinary treasure. Zhixio said, of those divine artifacts on the tier of legendary weapons, at least 17 of them came from the Tang clan. Even now, the Tang clan can still make a few extraordinary weapons. Although those rare ores have already dried up and cannot compare to those divine weapons on the tier of legendary weapons, they still surpass them in terms of exquisite design. The majority of the divine artifacts on the tier of legendary weapons are now hidden away by those sects and academies, just like how the Frost God Spear has always been enshrined in the Great Zhou Imperial Palace. What the experts of the present age want the most are the weapons produced by the Tang clan, so even a madman like Xiao Zhang would not dare to offend the Tang clan. Qin Chang Sheng suddenly felt that the metal ball in his hand had become heavy. Zhixio continued, if I'm not wrong, the metal ball in your hand should be the yellow paper umbrella. Qin Chang Sheng repeated in surprise, yellow paper umbrella? He vaguely remembered that he had heard this name before. Correct. Back then, that junior martial Uncle Su of the Mount Li sword sect ordered a magical artifact from the Tang clan. The Tang clan made some modifications to his original design, and in the end, it took them 30 years to successfully create it. That magical artifact is the metal ball in your hand right now. Its name is the yellow paper umbrella. The martial granduncle that Go Hanshi and the others often mentioned. Since it's a magical artifact that was ordered by that legendary expert, why is it still in the Tang clan? Because in the end, that junior martial Uncle Su did not come to take it. Why? Because he could not afford it. The room was silent. Qin Chang Sheng felt that the metal ball in his hand had become much heavier, and his voice became tense. This thing, is it very expensive? Zhixio said. The yellow paper umbrella was named by the old Master Tang himself. Qin Chang Sheng made a sound of surprise, indicating that he did not understand what this meant. Yellow paper is paper money. Zhixio looked at him and said. Qin Chang Sheng understood. Paper money was different from the banknotes in the world. The denomination could be casually written. If the number on the paper money was turned into real money, how much money would that be? Besides the Tang clan, was there anyone else in the world that could take out so much money? It was no wonder that the legendary junior martial uncle of Mount Li, who had personally designed this magical artifact, had no choice but to reluctantly give it up. This yellow paper umbrella caused everyone in the world to be short of money. But now, it had fallen into his hands. Chapter 246. Although no one has ever seen the yellow paper umbrella with their own eyes, because of this matter, the umbrella is extremely famous. There are even people in the Pavilion of Divination who have said that if one day the tier of legendary weapons were to be reconstructed, amongst the famous weapons and magical artifacts of this era, this umbrella should have the most qualifications to enter the tier. Zhixio looked at him and continued, let alone the fact that you and Tang 36 are just friends. Even if it was because you're now the principal of the Orthodox Academy and Tang 36 is a student of the Orthodox Academy, the Tang clan would not need to take out this umbrella to curry favor with you. Besides, the Tang clan has always only bought people, not curried favor with them. Qin Changsheng thought about the words that Tang 36 had said in the Mausoleum of Books when he had lost his temper, and he knew that these words were correct. Regardless of whether it was the Heavenly Tao Academy or the Temple Seminary, a third of their annual expenses were provided by the Wenshui Tangs. The old master truly did not need to treat the Orthodox Academy with any special regard, even if his most beloved grandson was currently a student of the Orthodox Academy. But he was thinking about something else at the moment. If that Mount Li's junior martial uncle saw that the magical artifact that he had poured so much blood and sweat into appear in the hands of junior like me, would he not be happy? If it were you, would you be unhappy? Of course I will. So of course he will. Then, will he come to rob or even kill for the treasure? Don't think so lowly of seniors and experts. Besides, Who among those priests would have thought that the Tang Old Master would give you a yellow paper umbrella as a greeting gift? As long as the Tang family and you don't say anything, who will know? You know. All right, but since it's a very powerful magic tool, it will definitely be useful in the future. We'll talk about it when we need it. I'm just worried that when I use it in the future, will it provoke the Mountley Sword sect? The Ivy Festival, the Grand Examination, the engagement with Su Yu Rong. Haven't you provoked them enough? That's true. Then the next question is this: how do I use the yellow paper umbrella? Zhishio thought it over, then said to him, try pouring your true essence in. This was the most common way of using magic treasures. Chun Chong Sheng obeyed and released a sliver of true essence, slowly entering the metal ball. A wonderful feeling entered the metal ball along with the true essence, and was reflected in his sea of consciousness. In the metal ball, he sensed countless undulating surfaces that looked like hills. Looking at it with his eyes, the surface of the metal ball was absolutely smooth, so these undulations should be on the inside of the ball. His true essence slowly moved forward along the undulating surface and finally arrived at a certain point in the center. A ray of light flashed there like a bolt of lightning, but also like the birth of a star. A gust of wind blew in the hall, and the metal ball in his palm trembled slightly. The scale-like lines on the surface of the metal ball split open, accompanied by a burst of fragmented mechanical springs and light metal clashing sounds. The cracked metal ball continuously changed and reassembled. Several film-like metal umbrellas appeared. Next, it was the umbrella ribs, then the handle. Not long after, an umbrella appeared in Chun Chongsheng's hand. This umbrella, from the surface to the handle, was entirely made of metal. It was incomparably bright, as if it was a piece of silver that had just been taken out of the furnace. The cool breeze continued to swirl around the hall. Soon after, something that made Chun Chongsheng and Zhishio feel uneasy happened. Those bright metal surfaces, upon encountering the cool breeze, began to change. Some areas constantly darkened, while others constantly darkened. In the space of a few breaths, the originally incomparably bright surface of the umbrella had become incomparably mottled. It looked like an ordinary oil paper umbrella that had been used for many years. It was covered in a thick layer of dust and looked extremely dirty. What's going on? Chun Sheng nervously asked. He noticed that even the handle of the umbrella that he was holding had already become incomparably old and black, as if it was made of wood. Don't panic. Seeing the changes to the metal umbrella, Zhishio was at first somewhat shocked, but then he calmed down. His eyes seemed to burn even hotter. He extended his hand and said to Chun Chongsheng, "Let me use your dagger." Chun Chongsheng glanced at the dagger at his waist and shook his head. He thought to himself, since it's a treasure gifted to me by the Tang Old Master, I can't just break it. Even Xioshan Jun's dragon scale sword might not be able to break this yellow paper umbrella. Zhishio expressionlessly said to him. He did not continue to insist and raise his right hand, saying, "Hold the umbrella tightly. I'm going to attack with all my strength." Chun Sheng hurriedly gripped the handle of the umbrella with both hands. Just as he finished his action, he saw Zhishio's fist smashing towards him. After breaking into ethereal opening while viewing the monoliths in a mausoleum of books, the current Zhishio was even stronger than when he had fought in the Grand Examination. Several perfectly straight lines tore through the air, directly attacking Chun Chongsheng's face from under the umbrella. At a certain moment, Chun Chongsheng could faintly see the sharp claws at the front of the lines. He even had a feeling that Zhishio really wanted to kill him. But at this moment, even if he did anything, it was already too late. He could only tightly grip the umbrella. Whoosh! The umbrella's handle trembled. 5 clear slashes appeared in the air before his eyes, and then those slashes gradually disappeared. He could faintly sense that the terrifying power from Zhishio's fingers had been completely absorbed and dissipated by some sort of ripple of qi hanging from the edge of the umbrella. Afterwards, through some unknown method or channel, it had been transferred to the ground under the umbrella. It was to the extent that he did not even feel the slightest ripple of power. as expected of a magical artifact that even Mount Lee's junior martial uncle could not afford. The defensive ability of this yellow paper umbrella was truly too strong. Zhishio looked at the claw marks that disappeared into the vertical plane of the umbrella and fell silent for a while. Chen Changsheng looked at him and asked, "That's it?" Zhishio said with an indifferent expression, "That's still not enough?" Chen Changsheng said, "This umbrella is so famous. I originally thought that its performance would be very impressive." Zhishio said, "Purely in terms of defense, this umbrella can withstand an attack from a star condensation expert. That's already very impressive." Chen Changsheng thought to himself, even if your bloodline is abnormal and you cannot be compared to a normal ethereal opening expert, isn't it a bit too much to compare your attack to a star condensation expert? Although he thought this, he naturally would not say it out loud. After thinking it over, he said, "Do you think that this umbrella has some other use?" Zhishio said, "I don't know." Chen Changsheng said, "Perhaps I should go ask the Tang Old Master." This umbrella had already become extremely ordinary, just like a really old and dirty umbrella. Zhishio looked at the umbrella in his hand, and after a moment of silence, he said, "It's very obvious that after this umbrella was made, today is the first time it's been opened. I think that not even the Tang Old Master is clear on all the uses of this umbrella. If you want to understand, you can probably only ask that junior martial uncle of Mount Lee." Chen Changsheng didn't say anything more. With a thought, he withdrew his true essence from the handle of the umbrella. Only a few cracking sounds could be heard as the yellow paper umbrella left behind several afterimages in the air. It was quickly retracted, finally transforming back into a metal ball in his palm. However, the surface of the ball was no longer smooth and bright. It looked like a pebble that had just been dug out from the sand. Northwest of Wenshui City was the Qinling Mountains. The Qinling Mountains extended for over 1,000 li, with a large river running through its northeastern foothills. The fertile soil on both sides was Tianliang County. The place that Chen Changsheng's party wanted to go to was still very far from the capital of Tianliang County. However, the noble clans of Tianliang County had long ago dispatched countless experts to surround the area. Because this year, the Garden of Zhou was in Hanqiu City. The Garden of Zhou was a miniature world. It opened once every 10 years, and each time, it would appear in a different place. Sometimes it would appear in Jiangnan, sometimes in the Eastern Mountains, sometimes in the snowy plains, sometimes around the capital, sometimes outside Xuelao City, and twice in the vast ocean between the continent and the Great Western Continent. When the convoy from the capital arrived at Hanqiu City, it was already evening. There was only one night left before the Garden of Zhou would officially open. Ethereal opening cultivators from all over the continent, including their teachers and elders, numbered at least several hundred. All of them were waiting in Hanqiu City. To many people, this last night seemed especially long. Many young experts, impatient with waiting in the inns, had long since left the city and arrived outside the forest. Beyond the forest, one could see snow-capped peaks burning in the twilight. There was nothing else. Those young experts looked at the twilight and softly discussed something, but none of them dared to approach the forest. Because outside the forest, there were several grass huts, and several important figures were sitting in these huts. Sitting in these huts, suppressing the firmament insignificant, this was overseeing. This year, overseeing the Garden of Zhou was an archbishop of the Sacred Hall of the Orthodoxy, 2 divine generals of the Great Zhou, and an elder of the longevity sect. But the one that truly made those young experts afraid to approach was in the grass hut at the very front. It was a middle-aged man with long hair draped over his shoulders. He had a confident bearing, and his gaze was extremely cold. The cultivators from Hanqiu City respectfully bowed towards the grass hut from afar, but the middle-aged man completely ignored them. No one had any objections to this, because the middle-aged man was the sect master of the emotion-severing sect, as well as the head of the Tianliangzhu clan. The number 1 clan of Tianliang County was naturally the Great Zhou Imperial Clan, the Qin clan. But the Chen Imperial Clan currently resided in the capital, and after Wang Po's Wang clan declined, The Zhu clan had become the #1 clan of Tianliang County. Of course, his status in the cultivation world was even more shocking, because he was Zhu Luo of the storms of the 8 directions. Drinking alone under the moon, Zhu Luo. The 5 saints, the storms of the 8 directions, and the people on the proclamation of liberation were the true peak experts of the continent. Compared to the 5 saints, the storms of the 8 directions did not have as much secular authority, but in terms of cultivation, they were not any weaker. This expert was revered by the common people as drinking alone under the moon, not because he loved wine, but because 300 years ago, he had journeyed to the snowy plains of the extreme north. Outside Shuilao City, he had personally observed the moon and composed a poem. After he composed that poem, he revealed the Saint Realm and killed the second demon general in one fell swoop, shocking the world. The emotion-severing sect cultivated the art of severing one's emotions and destroying one's nature. In that poem he had composed under the moon in Shuilao City, there was a line, "Drinking alone does not make friends." Everyone knew that this expert of the continent did not have a good temper. As a result, no one dared to approach that grass hut. Even the Pegasus seemed to sense the terrifying pressure and cold aura coming from that grass hut, lowering its head to express its submission. Qin Changsheng lightly stroked its wings to comfort it. He silently gazed at the thin and tyrannical figure within the grass hut. Some people noticed the insignia of Li Palace on this group of carriages and guessed at their origins. The quiet scene began to stir, and one could faintly hear someone whispering to ask who Qin Changsheng was. At dusk, the scenery was dim, and the snow-white Pegasus was very striking. Many people looked over, thinking to themselves, could it be that this seemingly ordinary youth is that person? At this moment, a cold and indifferent voice arose from beneath the grass hut. "You are Qin Changsheng? I've finally written about an expert of this level. Haha. The Pope and the Divine Empress are obviously not included. See you tomorrow." Chapter 247. You are Qin Changsheng? He is Qin Changsheng. Who is Qin Changsheng? Ever since the Ivy League gathering, or more accurately, ever since news of his engagement with Su Yurong had spread throughout the continent, these were the 3 phrases that Qin Changsheng had heard the most. As time passed, this situation did not improve, but rather, as his reputation appeared more and more, there were times when even he himself almost didn't know who he was. The curiosity of humans was not much different from that of cats. Even the Divine Empress had no way of stopping the mouths of the people of the world. From the very beginning, when he heard those discussions and saw those gazes, he was nervous and reserved, to the point where he was now numb to it all. However, he could not deal with it as usual, because the person who had asked this question was the solitary drunk under the moon, Zhu Luo, a senior expert that even the Li Palace had to treat courteously. He took a few steps forward and bowed towards the grass hut in the distance, dignified and orderly. Outside the quiet evening forest, there was a slight disturbance. Countless gazes were cast over, falling upon his body. Qin Changsheng's expression was calm, but how could he truly be calm? Thinking of the scene when he entered Wenshui's city, thinking of the deliberate flattery and cold gazes of those people, he felt very helpless. Inexplicably, being famous really wasn't a happy thing. Just how had Su Yurong lived these past few years? Compared to the uproar in the capital and Wenshui's city, the crowd outside the evening forest very quickly quieted down. This was because Zhu Luo was currently questioning Qin Changsheng, who would dare disturb him. The storms of the 8 directions were the strongest experts of a human world. In terms of strength, they were not below the 5 saints. Although the opening of the Garden of Zhou was important, Zhu Luo alone was enough. With one of the strongest experts of the world watching, unless the Demon Lord or Black Robe personally came, there would not be any problems. Zhu Luo did not look at Qin Changsheng, but at the snowy peaks behind the forest. His long hair that draped over his shoulders burned with the distant snowy peaks, giving off a particularly wild feeling. Has Meili Sha gone senile? He actually let a child like you become the principal of the Orthodox Academy. Hearing these words, the forest outside became even quieter. Many people looked at Chen Changsheng, their gazes filled with all sorts of emotions. There was sympathy and pity, but of course, there was also ridicule and schadenfreude. Although he had the merit of summoning the starlight of the mausoleum of books that night, Chen Changsheng was still only 15 years old. For him to become the principal of the Orthodox Academy at such a young age, for a moment, it was unknown how much discussion and censure the world had caused, but no one dared to publicly question the Pope's decision. Although Zhu Luo was one of the storms of the eight directions, it was still inconvenient for him to publicly challenge the will of the Pope, so he spoke of Mei Lisha. Of course, everyone knew who he was truly speaking of. Mei Lisha was an archbishop of the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education, one of the Orthodoxy's 6 prefects. His status was just about the same as Zhu Luo's. Zhu Luo's taunting words could not be considered as provoking the orthodoxy, nor was he bullying the weak. Officer Xin walked to Chen Changsheng's side and softly said a few words. Only now did Chen Changsheng know that Zhu Luo, as the head of the second aristocratic family of Tianliang County, had been close to the Chen imperial family that originated from Tianliang County for several hundred years. Because the divine empress was in power and had suppressed the imperial family, this peerless expert had always had a bad relationship with the capital and had an extremely cold relationship with the Li Palace. On the contrary, he was very close to the orthodoxy's old power that Mei Lisha represented and was even an old friend of Mei Lisha. Logically speaking, he should be taking care of Chen Changsheng. Why did this peerless expert speak out to make things difficult for him? Chen Changsheng very seriously thought about it. Only then did he understand that Zhu Luo was mocking his eminence, not him. Whether it was age or strength, in Zhu Luo's eyes, he was obviously a child. In the eyes of the common people, Orthodox Academy had long since declined. Chen Changsheng, being its principal, was only an empty title. Did he not see that the academy deep within the Hunter Blossom Lane only had 2 or 3 students? But for a senior expert like Zhu Luo, the significance of Orthodox Academy was far from this. Thinking back to the years when Orthodox Academy was under the leadership of that principal, it could be said to be infinitely glorious. Even the recently Shan Sword sect couldn't completely compare. Thinking that such an academy had actually allowed a youth like Chen Changsheng to become its principal, Zhu Luo would naturally feel somewhat regretful, or perhaps uncomfortable. For an important figure like him, he naturally couldn't imagine how much pressure his casual words would bring to Chen Changsheng, nor what kind of expectations it would bring to those spectators. Outside the forest was a scene of silence. Everyone looked at Chen Changsheng, wanting to know how he would answer Zhu Luo's question. Whether it was mockery or pity, there were very few people who were worried about him. At this moment, Chen Changsheng thought of the words that His Holiness had said to him during the grand examination. Lower your head, then you can bear the crown. Therefore, he slightly bowed, then lowered his head. He once again bowed towards Zhu Luo under the grass hut. Without saying anything, turned around and returned to the carriage. What was this? Was this disregard? A slight uproar once again arose amongst the crowd, thinking that Chen Changsheng had probably greatly offended Zhu Luo this time. Everyone knew that amongst all the peak experts of the continent, Zhu Luo's personality was the coldest and most severe. How would he teach Chen Changsheng a lesson? Contrary to everyone's expectations, Zhu Luo didn't get angry, nor did he say anything more. Using 2 fingers to pick up the wineskin, he brought it to his lips and took a long drink, then gazed at the gradually appearing stars upon the mountain, remaining silent. His words were said to Li Palace, to Mei Lisha, and also to His Holiness, the Pope, to clearly express his dissatisfaction, but it wasn't said to Chen Changsheng. Chen Changsheng naturally didn't need to answer. Not answering was the best answer. Priest Xin wiped the sweat from his forehead, looked at Chen Changsheng, and said in a low voice, "Enter the city to rest?" Chen Changsheng shook his head and said, "I won't enter Hanqiu City. I'll just wait in the carriage." The seemingly long night passed by uneventfully. Following the arrival of the morning light, people continuously arrived from the official road, but even more people arrived from Hanqiu City. Mei Lisha, under the protection of several dozen priests, arrived. Only now did Chen Chong Sheng know that the person presiding over this year's opening of the Garden of Zhou was him. But he didn't know when he had arrived or why he hadn't traveled together with them. The cultivators from the other sects and academies all had different reactions to this archbishop. Some people thought of Zhu Luo's word from last night and subconsciously looked towards the grass hut. A light spring breeze passed through the grass hut, carrying with it the thin sleeves of clothes. Zhu Luo had his eyes closed, half leaning against the railing, as if he had already passed out from drunkenness and was unwilling to wake up. Mei Lisha looked in that direction, smiled, and shook his head, then indicated that the ceremony to enter the garden should begin. Every 10 years, the Garden of Zhou would open once. It would open for 100 days, and after 100 days, everyone had to come out, or else they would be torn to pieces by the spatial turbulence in the Garden of Zhou. This was an iron law that had been proven many times over the years. The Garden of Zhou might contain Zhou Du Fu's legacy, but it also contained the legacies of many experts that had been defeated by him. This was also a proven fact. Entering the Garden of Zhou could be said to be an adventure, but it could also be said to be a trial by fire. The rules set down by the human world were very simple. No matter what treasure or technique one picked up within the Garden of Zhou, as long as they could successfully bring it out of the Garden of Zhou, then it would belong to the sect or academy that the cultivator belonged to. Within the Garden of Zhou, one could steal from one another, but apart from killing one's competitors, there were no restrictions on using any other methods. In the past, there have been people who questioned whether or not these rules were too cruel and bloody. The Pavilion of Divination, entrusted by the saints to set down these rules, explained that if one could not directly face the bleak encounters and dripping blood within the Garden of Zhou, then in the future, when facing the cold and bloodthirsty demon experts, they would still die. So why waste resources? If the human race wanted to continue living on this continent, then they had to be a bit more ruthless towards the youths that would bear the heavy responsibility in the future. The priests explaining the rules gave serious warnings to the cultivators that entered the Garden of Zhou, and even more priests were distributing items to the registered visitors. Inside the cloth bags were 2 items. One was a flowing water bottle that was used to calculate time, and the other was a gray string. Some people did not understand why a special flowing water bottle was needed to calculate time. Even if the sun and stars in the Garden of Zhou could not calculate the time in the real world, as cultivators of ethereal opening, it was impossible for them to count the days incorrectly. As for the use of the gray string, it was very clear. If someone encountered an insurmountable danger in the Garden of Zhou, or if they felt that their harvest was already enough, or if they did not dare to continue exploring, they only needed to light the gray string, and they would be directly transported to the gate of the Garden of Zhou. Zhu Luo stood guard outside the Garden of Zhou. There was no moon in the human world, so he could only drink alone under the starry sky. However, no matter how drunk he was, as long as people saw him, they would be safe. Chun Changsheng listened to the priest explain the rules and took the cloth bag that Priest Xian had handed over, but his mind was elsewhere. His gaze moved back and forth between the people outside the forest, and he felt slightly nervous. That senior sister from Holy Maiden Peak had come with him from the capital to Hanqiu City, and accompanying her was Yi Xiaolian. At this moment, the 2 of them were standing together with several other girls, so they should be fellow disciples of Holy Maiden Peak. He very seriously looked around, but he did not find anyone that looked like her. He had never seen her before, but he had heard that she was extremely beautiful, so he should be able to recognize her with a single glance. Had Su Yuran come or not? If she had come, where was she now? The morning light gradually flourished, but the fog showed no signs of dispersing. Between the forest and the mountain, the fog grew thicker and thicker, and the rays of the morning sun refracted and dispersed, forming all sorts of strange lines. Suddenly, a cry of surprise came from the crowd. The crowd looked into the fog and saw a small bridge faintly visible. Under the bridge was flowing water, and they saw a corridor. At the corner was an old plum tree, quiet and beautiful a garden. Was this the Garden of Zhou? The tranquil garden in the fog seemed to be illusory, yet it was real. It was like a mirage. The moment the garden of Zhou appeared, Zhu Luo opened his eyes. He gazed at the quiet garden in the fog behind the forest, his eyes surging with complex emotions as he thought of many things. His hand rested on the railing, and he tapped it lightly. Melisha also opened his eyes and slowly said, "Go. Don't be greedy and forget the time." Today, there are 3 chapters. This is the first chapter. Although it will definitely be written, it will definitely be especially slow, because a toothache is not an illness. I will try to finish the second chapter before 12:30. Chapter 248. When Melisha said these words, he looked at the several hundred cultivators that were preparing to enter the Garden of Zhou. These cultivators were all at the ethereal opening realm and could be considered as experts in a general sense. They weren't too old. It could be said that these several hundred ethereal opening cultivators were the future of the human world. Chun Changsheng was amongst these several hundred people. He knew that the archbishop's words were directed at him. He slightly nodded his head to indicate that he understood, then followed the crowd into the forest. The forest in the early morning was very quiet and secluded, perhaps because the Garden of Zhou was faintly discernible in the distance. Not even the cry of a bird could be heard, only the rustling sound of people stepping on the old leaves in the forest. It didn't take long for the several hundred cultivators to arrive at the thick fog. The faintly discernible tranquil garden within the fog became even clearer, as if it was right in front of them, yet it also seemed to be on the horizon. Many cultivators could already clearly feel that this fog was filled with dense essence qi. It was similar to the radiance of the stars, more like some sort of energy that was contained within crystals. Cultivators could not directly absorb it, but it was still extremely beneficial. It was of great assistance in calming the mind and mind. However, the depths of the fog hid an extremely great danger. A few cultivators with good eyesight could even see that outside the seemingly real, yet illusory, tranquil garden, within the fog, there were extremely brief flashes of lightning that incessantly flashed and then disappeared. The orthodoxies priests that were in charge of the opening of the Garden of Zhou, as well as the teachers and seniors of the various sects and academies, all remained outside the fog, not taking a single step forward. Perhaps the lightning within the fog had some sort of reaction towards cultivators that had surpassed the ethereal opening realm, bringing about some extremely terrifying consequences. This was already the outer garden of the Garden of Zhou. Several hundred cultivators were separated by the sects of the north and south, along with several dozen unaffiliated loose cultivators and cultivators from the gate of witchcraft in the wilderness. However, the fog forest was very quiet. No one spoke. Everyone was waiting for the opening of the Garden of Zhou. Every 10 years, the Garden of Zhou would appear on the continent, and each time it would open for a full 100 days, but it was not always discovered by people. In the past few decades, it had not appeared even once. The appearance of the Garden of Zhou outside Hanqiu City this year was not discovered by the humans, but rather confirmed by the mysterious and unfathomable military advisor Blackrobe of the demon race. Fortunately, one of Blackrobe's subordinates had attempted to assassinate Luo Luo in the capital's Orthodox Academy and failed. Because he was greedy for survival, he did not commit suicide on the spot and was captured alive by Xue Xingchuan. In the end, Zhou Yong used an unparalleled method of interrogation and actually found a spy organization that Blackrobe had planted deep within human society. Using this clue, he discovered the location and time of the opening of the Garden of Zhou. In order to control the Garden of Zhou, the opening location was not the most important thing. The most important thing was to grasp the key to the Garden of Zhou. In that period of time that was unknown to the world, the demons had sent out several upper-level ethereal opening experts. Before the Garden of Zhou had even floated over to Hanqiu City, they intended to seize the key first. The human world had already received the relevant information. On the surface, they pretended not to know, but in reality, they had also sent people to quietly infiltrate the outer garden of the Garden of Zhou. Because they had to hide from the eyes of the devil race, they had to quietly seize the initiative, so only one person went. This important decision was made by the 5 saints. The person they sent was Qiu Shanjun. whether it was human, demon, or Yao. In the ethereal opening stage, the eldest brother of Mount Li was invincible. Qiu Jun seemed to be in danger, but in reality, he had succeeded without any surprises. He had paid the price of heavy injuries, but he had also used this opportunity to become the youngest star condensation expert in the world. The world had already begun to acknowledge that Chun Changsheng had the qualifications to compete with Qiu Jun. However, the grand examination where Chun Changsheng obtained first upon the first banner happened once a year, while Qiu Jun obtaining the key to the Garden of Zhou was a major event that happened once every 10 years. Not mentioning the difference between star condensation and ethereal opening, more importantly, Qiu Jun had obtained glory in a battle against the devil race. No matter how shocking Chun Changsheng's performance in the grand examination was, it was, after all, a matter of the human world. The significance of the two was completely different. If Chun Changsheng had not viewed the entire front mausoleum in a single day a few days ago in the Mausoleum of Books and succeeded as principal of Orthodox Academy, his image might have been even dimmer. In the short period of time that they were waiting for the Garden of Zhou to open, many people subconsciously looked towards Chun Changsheng. Chun Changsheng did not notice this. He was still thinking about Su Yurong. After confirming that Su Yurong was not amongst the several hundred people, for some reason, he felt much more relaxed. According to the records in the Taoist canon, in previous years, there were also some cultivators that would enter the Garden of Zhou a few days later. Su Yurong was probably the same, but why did she purposefully come later? Was it because she did not want to receive the passionate gazes of adoration from the crowd, or because she did not want to see himself? Furthermore, how would the Garden of Zhou open? The key to the Garden of Zhou that Qiu Jun had obtained should have been given to Mount Li, but amongst the senior experts that had come to the Garden of Zhou today, there was only an elder from the Longevity sect. There was no one from Mount Li. Chun Changsheng stood at the very front of the crowd, looking at the turbulence formed by the lightning and the tearing of space within the fog, looking at the tranquil garden that was sometimes near and sometimes far, thinking about these matters. It was at this moment that a rainbow descended. This rainbow had originated from some unknown place, descending from high up in the sky, piercing through the thick fog and landing in front of the crowd. The moment the lightning and the turbulence formed by the tearing of space within the fog came into contact with this rainbow, they all dissolved and dispersed, disappearing without a trace. The fog also became much thinner, and the scenery behind the fog became much clearer. A small bridge, a flowing stream, a winding corridor, and in front of the flowering trees, a faintly discernible wall appeared. Between the wall, which was also in front of the several hundred cultivators, a circular arched door appeared. The inscribed board on the arched door had 2 words written on it: ethereal opening. Behind the arched door was a stone path made of blue stone, its surface covered in a light layer of moss. It curved forward, extending into the depths of the fog. There were flying eaves that connected together, and there was even more scenery. Standing in the forest, it was impossible to take in all of the scenery with a single glance. The scenery was all behind the wall. The winding path led to a secluded place. Who had ever cared for the Garden of Zhou? The fog gradually dispersed. The scenery gradually became clear. The water vapor gradually condensed, and with a pitter-patter, a rain fell. The spring wind blew the rain, wetting Chun Changsheng's face. He quietly stood where he was for a while, then walked behind the arched door known as ethereal opening. Several hundred cultivators followed him into the Garden of Zhou. The spring rain also began to fall outside the forest. The pitter-patter was like silk or thread. Several women dressed in white walked through the drizzle from the direction of Hanqiu City. In front of the forest, the priests of the Orthodoxy had confirmed their identities as members of the 13 divisions of Radiant Green. There was a plague in a certain place in the south. They had received the Pope's decree to bring the medical officials of the imperial court there to treat and save people, so they had arrived somewhat late. Seeing the several women walking into the forest, Zhu Luo revealed a hint of understanding. One of the women was dressed in the white ceremonial robes unique to the 13 divisions of radiant green. Her appearance could be considered delicate and pretty, and her bearing ordinary. Sensing Zhu Luo's gaze, the woman calmly bowed, then continued forward. Zhu Luo smiled, but said nothing. The next chapter is before 2:30. Chapter 249. The rainbow that opened the garden of Zhou originated from Mount Li, thousands of li away. The longevity sect was formed by 10 mountain sections. The Mount Li sword sect was the strongest, the hardest, and specialized in killing. It was not in the mountains, but in the northernmost, like the tip of a sword piercing the north. In the morning, the main peak of Mount Li was surrounded by clouds. From the middle of the mountain, all one could see was a flat layer of clouds, like an island floating in a sea of clouds. This rainbow had shot out from a dwelling at the highest point of Mount Li's main peak. On both sides of the stone steps, several hundred ancient pines stood solemnly. Xiao Songgong sat cross-legged at the top of the stone steps, and 3 discipline hall elders guarded the cave with swords. Seeing this, the Mount Li disciples at the bottom of the stone path could not help but discuss. That ray of light is the key to the Garden of Zhou. What is that key? It can create a rainbow and open the Garden of Zhou from thousands of li away. Eldest brother will be fine, right? What could happen? Do the demons dare to come to Mount Li to steal the treasure? Correct. The sect leader is guarding eldest brother in the cave. The 4 elders are defending with the sword array and with the myriad sword array of Mount Li. Even if the demon lord personally comes, what can he do? I wonder if 3rd brother and 7th brother have entered the Garden of Zhou. Speaking of which, I'm really curious about what's in the Garden of Zhou. If I could go in and see, that would be great. Then you have to hurry up and cultivate, or else you'll be stuck at the middle stage of meditation. Don't even think about entering the Garden of Zhou, let alone catching up to those seniors. The 7 seniors are all dazzling geniuses. How can we compare? Speaking of which, is that youth called Chun Chong Sheng really at the upper level of ethereal opening? Who knows? The Northerners have always been absurd, and their words are often exaggerated. Although the Orthodox Academy has already declined to let such a child be the principal, it's truly absurd. Junior, be careful with your words. That's His Holiness's arrangement. It's already absurd, and you can't say it? Don't the elders usually talk like this? That youth called Chun Chong Sheng, to be able to cultivate to such a level in a short year, he must have something extraordinary about him, or else 2nd brother would not have given him such a high evaluation in his letter. So what? Could that fellow be mentioned in the same breath as eldest senior brother? If eldest brother doesn't succeed in star condensation and enters the Garden of Zhou, I don't believe that Chun Chongsheng will be able to steal anything. I also don't know what Senior Su is thinking. With the true dragon before her, could she not see who is stronger and who is better? In the past few months, whenever the disciples of Lishan Sword Sect talked about their seniors who were studying in the capital or their eldest senior's famous love affair, Chun Chongsheng's name would naturally be mentioned. Afterwards, they would enter a boring cycle of disdain, caution, and then disdain again. However, in the next moment, all the discussions stopped abruptly. A clear tremor spread through the entire main peak of Mount Li. The magnitude was not large, and the surrounding sea of clouds was still calm. However, the faces of the people in the mountain instantly became filled with fear and unease, because this sort of thing had never happened before. A clear light suddenly appeared on the periphery of the sea of clouds. Countless sword shadows with terrifying power shuttled through the layers of clouds. Sometimes they rose like the sun, and sometimes they disappeared like a waterfall. Countless sword shadows let out mournful cries in the air. They were like schools of swordfish in the sea, frantically searching for food. This was the legendary myriad sword array of Mount Li. After a while, the myriad sword array did not discover any trace of the enemy. Following the array's instructions, it returned to its original position, once again concealing itself in the mountain's countless sword caves. The Mount Li disciples raised their heads in panic to look at the peak. They saw that the rainbow was still the same, but they felt like there was something else inside, or that the threads of light inside had become somewhat chaotic. Elder Xiao Songgong, who was sitting cross-legged at the very top of the stone steps, suddenly opened his eyes. Gazing at the distant rainbow, he sternly yelled, "What happened?" The expressions of the 3 Discipline Hall elders became even more solemn. They turned to look at the cave where the rainbow had appeared. An extremely long and clear roar burst forth from the cave abode. The rainbow light that had become somewhat chaotic quickly stabilized along with this clear whistle. However, the expressions of Xiao Songgong and the other Mountly elders did not relax. It actually required the sect master to use the whistle of the true sword to suppress it. Just what had happened. In the next moment, the Mountly sect master's calm and dignified voice rang out. Send a message to the Li Palace. There has been a change in Hanxiu City, or perhaps the demons have made a strange move. Tens of thousands of li away from Hanxiu City was a snowy plain. There was a lot of snow everywhere. Although it was currently spring, the snow here was still very heavy, like the feathers of a peacock. If the snow stopped or lightened a little, one would probably be able to see that majestic demon city that could stand side by side with the capital of the Great Zhou. A demon male cloaked from head to toe in a black robe walked alone through the snowstorm. His back was to that famous Shuilao city, and he walked for a very long time. Only when the snowstorm had completely obscured the silhouette of the city did he stop. He gazed to the distant south, a bewitching smile appearing on his lips. From the speed at which he walked and his slightly slender body, this demon male was probably very old. It must be known that the demon race had always been renowned for their incomparably powerful bodies and near-perfect athletic abilities. When he gazed to the south, his black robe slightly lifted, revealing a very pale complexion. Beneath his skin was a green color that would make others loathe and fear, one that carried far too much of the aura of death. However, the smile on his lips was still as bewitching, because his handsomeness had already surpassed the limits of words, even capable of defeating the god of death. He sat down in the snowstorm and took out a black square plate. It was unknown what this black square plate was made of, but it seemed to possess some sort of heat. When the snowflakes landed on it, they instantly melted and then evaporated into water vapor. The water vapor was the clouds. The black square plate was shrouded by the clouds, and the demon male's face was also shrouded by the clouds, making it hard to see clearly. Only his extremely bright eyes could not be hidden. Many sceneries appeared on the black plate amidst the clouds. Compared to the real scenery, the scenery on the black plate was naturally many times smaller. One could faintly make out several mountains, a grassland, and several gardens. These gardens were completely different from the ornate style of Shuilao City. They were more like the gardens of the southern human world. The demon male closed his eyes and pondered for a long time, then raised his head to look to the south again. There were countless snowstorms in the sky. Logically speaking, he could not see anything, but he saw a rainbow. His mood changed slightly, and he sighed, "I haven't seen you for decades, but you are still the same." After saying this, the demon male calmed down again. With an indifferent expression, he stretched out his hand towards the sky. The demon race had a proverb, fishing the moon from the water. His current actions were very similar to this proverb. It was somewhat absurd and nonsensical. But when he pulled back his hand, a wisp of a rainbow appeared between his fingers. In the sky, he had plucked a sliver of that rainbow that led to the Garden of Zhou. In the next moment, he gently placed that wisp of rainbow on the northeast position of the black square plate. The clouds on the black square plate encountered that wisp of rainbow and suddenly blurred, revealing a path. Several thousand li away from Hanxiu City was a tea hill. There was a lot of tea here, and tea was everywhere. Since it was spring, the tea trees here naturally grew extremely well. Like the feathers of a peacock, if the wind blew or if the sun shone for too long, one would be able to smell the fragrance of tea. In the early morning, the depths of the tea hill were shrouded in mist. Within the mist, one could faintly make out a path that led to a verdant wilderness. An old man, carrying a zither and a little girl of about 10 years of age followed that path into the mist. The little girl had a childish face and a picturesque appearance, but for some reason, she made one tremble in fear. The old man, carrying the zither, and the little girl disappeared into the mist. In front of them, several figures could be faintly seen. Not long after, a man and a woman also walked into the tea hill. From their appearance, they seemed to be husband and wife. Their faces were simple and honest. The husband carried a pole, while the woman carried a metal pot. If they were selling food on the side of the road, then this pot was a little too big. No one knew what kind of truth was hidden within the mist of the tea hill. No one knew that the path that led into the mist led to a place called the Garden of Zhou, because no one could have imagined that the Garden of Zhou could actually open a second door. The wind and snow were furious. The demon male had forcefully opened the Garden of Zhou, and it was clear that he had used up a great deal of mental energy. His face became even paler, and the deathly still green color on his face became even thicker. He looked at the black square plate and silently prayed. The scenery on the plate became increasingly clear, and he could even see the several hundred human cultivators that had just entered the Garden of Zhou. Within the several hundred human cultivators, he very easily found his targets. He extended his finger and snapped it above Qi Jian and Zheshio's heads, igniting 2 vital flames. Then he placed the vital flames into 2 bronze pots and let them float in the wind and snow. Even the frigid wind and furious snow were unable to extinguish the 2 vital flames. The demon male calmly looked at the black square plate. After searching for a while, his gaze fell on the several women wearing the white ceremonial robes of the 13 divisions of radiant green that had just entered the Garden of Zhou. The 3rd bronze pot floated in the wind and snow. Finally, he looked at Chun Chongsheng. He looked at Chun Chongsheng's figure in silence for a very long time. Then he smiled. He passed the positions of Qi Jian, Zheshio, and the girl from the 13 divisions of radiant green to his subordinates, the people that had just entered the Garden of Zhou from Tea Hill. I believe that you should continue to live, at least until you are 20. So I will not let you die so easily. So I will always watch over you. He looked at Chun Chongsheng as he spoke. His black robe was very eye-catching in the wind and snow. The 2 words, ethereal opening, were written on the arched gate of the Garden of Zhou. This also represented the rules of this world. Only cultivators at ethereal opening could enter this place, and only then would they not be destroyed by the rules of this miniature world. Several hundred cultivators passed through the arched gate and arrived in this quiet garden, then dispersed. Before the cultivators of the orthodoxy left, the majority of them specially came to bid farewell to Chun Chongsheng. As for the people from the sects and schools of the south, they only said a word to Liang Xiaoxiao. Not too long after, the garden became quiet again. Chun Chongsheng stood on the small bridge and looked at the flowing water below. He suddenly felt somewhat uncomfortable. Zheshio stood behind him and said, "This is not the time to grieve over spring and autumn, and you also shouldn't be the type of person to grieve over spring and autumn." Chun Chongsheng smiled and also prepared to leave. But just at this moment, he suddenly felt a strange feeling, as if someone was spying on him. He looked around the garden. He did not see anyone, but that feeling still existed. He cultivated the Tao of following his heart, so he was not in a hurry to leave. Instead, he stood on the bridge for a very long time. Suddenly, a light rain began to fall in the Garden of Zhou. The bridge was dotted with water, and the water rippled in circles. He looked at the sky. After a moment of silence, he took out an umbrella from his bosom and opened it. The umbrella seemed rather shabby and rather heavy. It was the yellow paper umbrella. The moment he opened the umbrella, that feeling disappeared. He looked at Zheshio and said, "Let's go. 2 chapters for tomorrow guaranteed." Chapter 250. Zheshio walked up and looked at the yellow paper umbrella in his hand. He asked, "What's wrong?" Chun Chongsheng did not know how to explain. After some thought, he said, "Sudden inspiration?" Zheshio was silent for a while, then said, "That's an illness." Chun Chongsheng smiled and said, "I should be able to cure this illness." The 2 walked down the stone bridge, held the yellow paper umbrella, and disappeared into the misty rain. After a while, the girls from the 13 divisions of Radiant Green that had arrived later also arrived on the stone bridge. One of them had a delicate and pretty face and a very ordinary temperament. She seemed like a common disciple from a cultivation sect. The girl stood at the head of the bridge and raised her head to look at the drizzle falling from the sky. She was somewhat abnormal. A slightly older girl from the 13 divisions of Radiant Green looked at the girl's profile and revealed an expression of reverence in her eyes. Another girl looked at the girl and gathered her courage to ask, "Senior, do you really not want to see him that much?" The girl calmly said, "Seeing him or not, there's no difference. Then there's no need to see him. I hate trouble the most." Tens of thousands of li away from Honshio City, in the snowstorm, the demon man, shrouded in a black robe, looked at the black square board and frowned. Just a moment ago, Chun Changsheng's figure had disappeared, and soon after, Zhixio had also disappeared. He did not know that Chun Changsheng had opened the umbrella that the one Shui Tang Old Master had gifted him. He silently thought, just what is going on? In the present world, no one understood the Garden of Zhou better than him, and no one had more far-reaching plans than him. He believed that he could perfectly control the situation in the Garden of Zhou. If this black square board was a chessboard, then the people in the Garden of Zhou were all his chess pieces. But now, he suddenly discovered that a chess piece had disappeared from the chessboard. This made him very surprised. The 3 bronze pots floating in the snowstorm had ignited the vital flames of Zhixio and the other 2. He had already connected them to his subordinates that had infiltrated the Garden of Zhou, but he still had not had the time to deal with Chun Changsheng. He could only wait for Chun Changsheng to show himself again. He also did not know when the drizzle in the Garden of Zhou would stop. The snowstorm suddenly stopped. It was not a normal stop, but a true stop. The wind was silent. Snowflakes that looked like peacock feathers floated in the air and scattered around the demon race man. The demon raised his head and looked at a certain place in the depths of the snowfield. His expression was still indifferent, and his eyes were slightly narrowed. They appeared slender and delicate, but they were so lifeless. A clear sword mark slowly appeared there, as if it wanted to cut open the snowy sky. Where did this sword come from? How could it stop the wind and snow of the infernal domain? In order to murder some juniors, you've exposed our sect's cultivation method. Don't you think that the price you've paid is a little too high? A voice rang out in the snowy sky. This voice was very clear and had a sense of laziness to it. To be honest, we've been investigating for hundreds of years, but only today did we find out that the demon race's military advisor is actually a candle shadow shaman. The man smiled and didn't say anything. It turned out that he was the most mysterious and terrifying demon military advisor, Black Robe. No wonder his black robe was so eye-catching in the wind and snow. Then who was the owner of this clear voice? Facing the unfathomable demon military advisor, Black Robe, that person didn't show the slightest fear and even seemed rather unconcerned. With the terrifying sound of space being torn apart, the sword mark in the snowy sky slowly expanded and a person walked out. As he walked through the sword mark, that person seemed to be plated with a layer of sharpness. His clothes and eyes were filled with a bright luster. It wasn't until that person had walked several steps on the snowy ground that the sharpness gradually faded. It was a human man of unknown age. If one only looked at the laziness in his eyes, he seemed to be a young man, but the serenity and depth in his eyes made it seem like he had cultivated for 1,000 years. The man stood on the snowy ground with his hands behind his back. A sword was tied to his waist, lightly swaying. He seemed very casual and elegant. In order to accomplish something, a price must be paid. Black Robe looked at the man and calmly said, "Su Li, you've wandered the world for hundreds of years. Have you still not understood this principle? There is only one person in the world who had the surname Su and could make demon military advisor Black Robe interested in talking with him. Mount Li's junior martial uncle, Su Li. To the human world, the demon military advisor Black Robe was the greatest nightmare. From a certain perspective, he was even more terrifying than the demon lord. Then the junior martial uncle of Mount Li, Su Li, was the most bizarre legend, the most unbridled ocean. Because of the Garden of Zhou, they had met, so who would be able to leave? Su Li was not interested in Black Robe's words. From several hundred years ago, he had become extremely uninterested in the extremely profound conversations of his senior brother, the sect master, the holy maiden, the pope, and Emperor Taizong. His interest lay in the sword, in the journey, in the drifting clouds, and the starry sky. He directly asked, "How many subordinates did you send into the Garden of Zhou? Does the Candle Shadow Shaman still have clansmen for you to use?" Black Robe waved his hand, and the mist on the black square plate rose once more, annihilating the scenery and the people in the Garden of Zhou. He looked at Su Li, squinted his eyes, and smiled. "What? Worried about your daughter?" Hearing these words, Su Li also squinted his eyes and smiled. When Black Robe squinted his eyes were slender and delicate, but they were filled with a deathly aura. It was very frightening. When Su Li squinted his smile seemed to come from the bottom of his heart. At this moment, it was like the dazzling edge of a sword. He sighed ruefully. "No wonder you're the legendary Black Robe. Truly frightening. You actually even know about this matter." Black Robe calmly replied, "In this world, there are very few things that I don't know." Su Li's smile gradually faded, and with a serious expression, he asked, "Then do you know, when I go crazy, how frightening I am?" Black Robe's smile became even more sincere. "Back then, when you went crazy for the first time, Mount Li's myriad sword array was almost destroyed by you. When you went crazy for the second time, 17 elders of the longevity sect died in one night. So even now, they are still unable to elect a sect master. Just like that, one of the 6 saints was lost. You humans all say that Painted Armor Xiao Zhang is a madman. But how could you know that he can't even compare to one of your toes? It's just that when you go crazy, the things you do are so crazy that no one dares to mention them." Su Li seriously explained, "The second matter has nothing to do with me. At the very least, I won't admit it." Black Robe smiled, but said nothing. Su Li asked, "Since you know that I'm very frightening when I go crazy, why do you still do this?" Black Robe's smile faded. He looked at him and said very seriously, "This means that I have the confidence to control everything." Su Li raised his brows. "The thing that I can't understand the most is how you control the Garden of Zhou. Sometimes, I even wonder if you're Lord Wang Jitsa." Black Robe calmly replied, "In these several hundred years, you've always been traveling the world. Presumably, you've been looking for me, wanting to ask me the truth?" Su Li calmly looked at him, and his right hand rested on the hilt of his sword. He said, "Even now, I still don't know who you are, but since I've found you after so much difficulty, I don't want to let you go." The military advisor of the demon race, Black Robe, was unquestionably the most mysterious and frightening enemy of the human world. Back then, if not for him or the allied armies under Emperor Taizong's command, they would have already conquered Shualao City, and the demons would have already become a name in history. In these several hundred years, what the experts of the human world wanted to do the most was to find Black Robe, and then kill Black Robe. The problem was, even now, no one knew Black Robe's true identity, much less find a trace of him. Until today, when Black Robe plucked a rainbow from the sky and opened a door to the Garden of Zhou, alarming Mount Li. From there, Su Li, who was traveling in the north, found him. Finding me is not important. What's important is killing me. The problem is, can you kill me? Black Robe calmly looked at Su Li and said, "I touched the Garden of Zhou and revealed a trace, allowing you to take advantage of it. But have you ever thought that this could also be an ambush for you? Just like what I said before, you've searched for me for several hundred years without finding me. Then, if I didn't want you to find me, how could you possibly find me?" Su Li's eyes narrowed even more. His smile was full of smiles, and the sharpness gradually rose. Black Robe did not seem to notice, and indifferently said, "At the beginning, I sent that member of the Yeshur clan to the capital to assassinate the little princess of the demi-humans, precisely so that you humans could find the Garden of Zhou first. In order to gain your trust, I even borrowed His Majesty's Heaven's Net. Of course, that little guy Qiushan Jun's performance in the Outer Garden somewhat exceeded my imagination. The methods I originally prepared were unable to be put into practice, so I could only use my backup plan. Suli said, "You want to kill people in the garden?" Black Robe said, "Correct." Suli said, "If you really have such methods, why haven't you done anything in the Garden of Zhou in these several hundred years?" Black Robe looked at him and smiled. "Because you only had a daughter that you treasured more than 10 years ago, and because your daughter can only enter the Garden of Zhou this year, I wanted to let you know that I have the ability to harm your daughter, so you had to come find me. Only then could I kill you." Suli seemed to understand and said, "So in the end, it was still to kill me?" Black Robe said, "After spending so much effort to arrange this, I still have to obtain enough benefits." Suli said somewhat awkwardly, "I'm not a saint, and I don't control a storm. To the humans, I'm not important. You're not being modest, but mocking my eyesight." Black Robe shook his head and said sternly, "In my eyes, the so-called 5 saints and storms of the 8 directions are not worth fearing, because they're already old and have no desire to advance. But you're different. You're not bound by the secular world, and you're alone. You dare to kill, you can kill, and you even do not hesitate to kill indiscriminately. If my race wants to defeat the humans, people like you must die." Suli was silent for a very long time. Suddenly, he said somewhat vexedly, "Why do I feel like I'm very happy to hear these words?" Black Robe laughed, but did not say anything. He picked up the black square plate and gave it a light shake. The clouds and mist retreated, and everything seemed to be the same as before. Suli's expression turned slightly cold. He said, "You close the Garden of Zhou?" Black Robe said, "This is Mr. Zhou's world. Although I have some understanding, I still cannot completely close it. However, temporarily closing it for a few days is still possible." Suli slightly raised his eyebrows and said, "Just what do you want to do?" Black Robe said, "I've said it before. After spending so much effort to arrange this, I still have to obtain enough benefits. Other than you, I still want to kill a lot of people." Suli coldly said, "Only ethereal opening cultivators can enter the Garden of Zhou. Even if you had a plan long ago, the subordinates that sneaked in are still limited no matter how strong they are. A few demon children want to defeat several hundred people. The demons are blessed by the heavenly Tao. They are innately able to cultivate, and their bodies can be said to be perfect. But why can't they defeat us humans? Because we rely on our numbers to bully you demons. Then have you ever thought about why you humans have never been able to defeat us? It's because the more humans there are, the easier it is for internal strife to occur. Other than the carrion-eating jackals, I've never seen a race on this continent that likes to kill each other as much as you humans do. Of course, I also never thought that opening a side door in the Garden of Zhou would allow me to bury several hundred ethereal opening human cultivators. I only want to kill a few people, that's all. This is not difficult at all." Suli asked, "Who do you want to kill?" Black Robe smiled and said, "Zheshio is too similar to you in the past, so he must be killed. The 2 girls, including your daughter, must also die. That young principal of the Orthodox Academy is called Chen Changshen. It's just these 4 people. I'm very regretful that Go Hanshi did not enter the Garden of Zhou. Otherwise, it would be more or less complete. Why do you want to kill these 4 people? Because they are humanity's future, and you are humanity's present. The reappearance of the Garden of Zhou has helped me destroy humanity's present and future. Presumably, if its master knew of this matter, he would also be very gratified." Suli was silent for a while, then asked, "What about Qiu-Shan-Jun, the bloodline of a true dragon, reaching star condensation before the age of 20? He really is a true genius." Black Robe looked at him and said with a smile, "It's a pity that your junior is infatuated. When he knows that opening the Garden of Zhou is like opening a door to the abyss for those 4 people. When he knows that Su Yurong died, because of him, he will definitely regret it for the rest of his life. To deal with this kind of infatuated person, not killing him is even crueler than killing him." Suli said, "Wang Pe, Xiao Zhang, Liang Wang's son." These 3 names were all on the proclamation of liberation. When he said it, it was a question and also a challenge. Black Robe thought it over, then said, "Just like you said, humans are so fertile. I still need to be a little more patient. Let's take it slowly kill them slowly. I think there will be a day when I can kill them all." After saying this, he began to cough. His handsome face became even paler, and the green color under his skin became even denser, making him seem especially monstrous. A trickle of blood even flowed from the corner of his mouth. Su Li's figure also began to sway slightly, and his eyes became slightly gloomy. Only now did several hundred crisscrossing sword slashes appear in the stillness of the snowy sky. Some sword slashes penetrated several li into the snow, and even seemed like they wanted to split open the sky. But in the end, they were unable to split open because outside the snowy sky, there was still dancing snow. As it turned out, while they were talking, these two strongest experts of the world had always been fighting. With black robes coughing, the stillness of the snowy sky gradually loosened, and the snowflakes began to fall once more. Several mountainous figures slowly appeared in the surroundings of the snowy plains, their pressure terrifying to the extreme. Several demon great generals appeared on the battlefield. A shadow emerged from the distant Xiuelao city, obscuring half the sky, and landed on the snowy plains. Su Li stared blankly, then turned to the south. He squinted his eyes, and his expression became slightly melancholic, as if he was deeply moved. Then he roared, "Someone come quickly!" I suddenly very much look forward to the scene of Chun Chongqing fighting Little and Little Su at Mount Li after a million words. The next chapter is before 11. Chapter 251. Mount Li's myriad sword array was activated once more. Under the morning sun, the myriad sword glows were like flowing gold. The white crane let out a clear cry and left Holy Maiden Peak. On the dew platform of the imperial palace in the capital, the divine empress was nowhere to be seen. The bells of the Li Palace began to ring without warning. Although they were not hurried, they rang out continuously as if they would never stop. In the grass hut outside Hanqiu City, Zhu Luo suddenly opened his eyes. There was only boundless vigilance and shock in them, not a hint of drunkenness. Inside the carriage, Mei Li Sha also opened his eyes. An indescribable expression flashed through his slightly turbid eyes. They did not know what was happening outside Xiuelao City in the distant north, nor did they know that Mount Li was shaking, nor could they hear the bell of the Li Palace. However, just a moment ago, they sensed an extremely shocking matter. The Garden of Zhou had closed once more. The forest was in an uproar. The elders of the Longevity sect, the priests of the Orthodoxy, and the teachers of the various academies and sects all surged in front of that persistent cloud. The lightning in the fog was still as ferocious as a snake. The passage opened by the rainbow in the early morning had disappeared and was once again occupied by the fog. The rainbow was still there, but its position was constantly shifting. It was unable to accurately open up a path, and could only cause the mist to tumble continuously. Zhu Luo and Mei Li Sha stood at the very front, their expressions solemn as they looked at the scene in front of them. With their eyesight, they could see that the winding path was faintly discernible within the fog. They could confirm that the path hadn't completely disappeared, it was just that it was temporarily blocked by some kind of disturbance. A small world has its own rules of operation. Apart from the owner, no one can change it. Mei Li Sha slowly said, "Unless Zhou Dufu comes back to life, no one can close the garden of Zhou prematurely. Presumably, in a few days, the gate to the garden should open again." That being said, the atmosphere in the forest did not lighten up. Who was it that was affecting the opening of the Garden of Zhou? What does he want to do? Zhu Luo and Mei Li Sha didn't even need to think about it to know that it was definitely the work of the demons. They even immediately thought of that person's name, Black Robe. Mei Li Sha thought of many things, and the worry on his face became more and more intense. When would the gate to the Garden of Zhou open again? What would happen in the garden during these days? What would those people face? What would happen between them? Who could control the situation? Zhu Luo suddenly said. She went in. Mei Li Sha was silent for a moment, then said, "It depends on him." The people in the Garden of Zhou did not know what was happening outside. Qin Changsheng and Zheshio held umbrellas as they walked through the drizzle. After leaving the tranquil garden with the small bridge and flowing water, they arrived at the mausoleum filled with green. Standing in front of a cliff, looking down at the rain-soaked forest beneath his feet and the distant grassland bathed in sunlight, Chun Chang Sheng felt his mind open up. The Garden of Zhou was not just a garden. It was a true miniature world. Zhou Dufu was indeed worthy of being the strongest expert of the continent in 1,000 years. The miniature world he left behind was many times better than the Pope's green leaf world. They followed the mountain path into the forest and walked out of the forest. The two of them came to the front of a river and looked into the distance. They saw that the grassland was still shining under the sun, and the distance between them had not shortened. Chun Chang Sheng took out the flowing water bottle and examined it. He discovered that it had taken an hour to reach this point. Comparing it to the time he had silently counted, he confirmed that the flow of time hadn't increased or decreased. I heard that in the depths of the grassland, 1 month is 1 day outside the garden. It's the best place to cultivate, Zheshio said. However, it's already been over 100 years, and no one has been able to reach the deepest part of the grassland. No one knows if Zhou Dufu's legacy is there or not. They only know that the grassland hides many dangers, and there are some especially fierce monsters. Chun Chang Sheng had also read about the relevant records in the Taoist canon. Hearing the word monster, he subconsciously glanced at Zheshio. The wolf tribe youth had lived on the snowy plains since he was young, so he was most likely most skilled at hunting beasts. The monsters that can live and reproduce in that grassland are not something that ethereal opening cultivators can contend against. Zheshio expressionlessly said, "So don't think too much about it." Looking at the distant grassland, Chun Chang Sheng had no way of not thinking about it. He subconsciously rubbed the hilt of his sword. The sound of the river was rather loud, or perhaps it was in his sea of consciousness. In any case, Zheshio did not hear the 2 weak creaks. "Where are we going?" Zheshio asked. The Garden of Zhou had a total of 5 regions. Other than the distant grassland that seemed calm, but was actually extremely dangerous, the other 4 regions had basically been completely explored by human cultivators and demons over the past several hundred years. Many of the relics of the once all-powerful experts of the continent had been found and their legacies re-established. Many magical artifacts had also seen the light of day once more. After several hundred years, no one knew what else was in the Garden of Zhou, but all the sects and schools had a common understanding. If one wanted to obtain a few magical artifacts or legacies, they would have to put in more effort and take more risks than the previous generation of cultivators. Chun Chang Sheng thought about it, then said, "Is there any place you want to see?" When he was viewing the monoliths in the mausoleum of books, he had already thought about what he wanted to do after entering the Garden of Zhou. He wanted to see some scenery and find some ruins. After that night, the destination of his journey had been slightly revised, but the grassland was definitely the last place he would go. Zheshio said, "I want to go to the sword pool." Then he added, "If there really is a sword pool." Chun Chang Sheng said, "The sword pool is only a legend. No one has ever seen it. In the past several hundred years, so many senior cultivators have not found it. I don't think we can find it either." "There are no swords," Zheshio seriously said to him. Chun Chang Sheng silently thought about it for a while. It really was like that. In the past several hundred years, the Garden of Zhou had opened many times. The cultivators that had entered the Garden of Zhou to explore had found many magical artifacts, precious treasures, and the most precious legacies, but they had never found a sword. Whether it was in the mountains where the pines rustled angrily or the shores of the lakes that rippled like mirrors, there were no swords. Back then, so many experts of the continent had been defeated by Zhou Dufu's hands. Where had their swords gone? The legend of the sword pool truly did have some truth to it. Even if our luck is good and we really do find the sword pool, those swords will definitely all be broken and devoid of spiritual energy. It would be better to go to the caves and the cliffs and search. Perhaps we can find a suitable magical artifact. "I don't have a sword," Zheshio seriously said to him. "If possible, I want to find a sword to use. Moreover, I don't like magical artifacts." Only then did Chun Chang Sheng remember that Zheshio had always fought barehanded. After thinking about it, he said, I remember that in the notes of someone before, if you follow this river upstream, there will be a mountain stream on the right side, 10 some li away. Someone once found a sword sheath at the bottom of the stream. If there really is a sword pool in the Garden of Zhou, then it should be nearby. At some point, the rain had stopped. Chen Changsheng put away his umbrella and went upstream with Zhixio. Not long after, they suddenly heard the mournful cries of swords coming from the riverbank in front of them. Skirting the rocks, they saw a young girl sitting against a tree. Her left shoulder was covered in blood. It was the senior from Holy Maiden Peak that had come with Chen Changsheng from the capital. The girl called Yi Xiaoyan stood guard in front of her with her sword held horizontally, her face full of anger. I would like to inform everyone of a few matters. First, the book review area is holding a small event. The event will be held tomorrow, which is the 18th of November. The theme of the event is XXXX. Tomorrow, I will write less because I will be drinking. I have a few small gifts for everyone. They are all the work of the sub-editors. For more information, please move to the top of the book review area. Second, in a little while, I will be holding a lottery on Weibo. It's purely for fun, but the prizes should be pretty good. Third, also in a little while, I will be posting the prototype of the entrance to the Garden of Zhou on WeChat. It was obtained in September through collecting information. Collecting information with infinite echoes. Chapter 252. With a clang, the sword light by the river suddenly disappeared, and a flying sword returned to its sheath. Chen Changsheng and Zhixio looked over and saw that the one who had attacked was a middle-aged cultivator dressed in hemp garments. His eyes were deep and spirited, and there was a young Taoist at his side, most likely his companion. The several hundred cultivators that had entered the Garden of Zhou had all entered ethereal opening. Most of them were the core strength of the various academies and sections. There weren't many people who could tell their age at a glance. In Chen Changsheng's opinion, if they weren't loose cultivators, then they should have come from some small sect. His thoughts were correct. This middle-aged cultivator was called Fu Qiansong, and he was a cultivator from a place in the south called the Clear Void Monastery. He was even the monastery master of the Clear Void Monastery, and his cultivation was already at the middle level of ethereal opening. In places like the Li Palace or the Longevity sect, he might not be special, but in ordinary sects, he was already an incredible expert. The young man was his eldest disciple, and he had just entered ethereal opening. Seeing Chen Changsheng and Zhixio suddenly appear, the young Taoist from the Clear Void Monastery immediately became nervous. His right hand slightly trembled, as if he was ready to summon his flying sword at any time. The middle-aged cultivator immediately recognized Chen Changsheng's identity and raised his hand to stop the disciple. He then bowed to Chen Changsheng and said, "Greetings, Principal Chen." The Clear Void Monastery was a small and unknown sect that belonged to the Orthodoxy. According to the rules of the Garden of Zhou, this middle-aged cultivator had no qualms about attacking a disciple of Holy Maiden Peak. However, when facing Chen Changsheng, he became respectful. After all, he still had to live outside the Garden of Zhou, so how could he dare to be rude to Chen Changsheng? After hearing the middle-aged cultivator's self-introduction, Chen Changsheng finally understood what had happened. Looking at the damaged magical artifact in the cultivator's hand, he thought to himself, it said that all the treasures and legacies in the Garden of Zhou have already been discovered, so why were these two girls from Holy Maiden Peak able to find them so easily? That was a magical artifact that the seniors of my gentle stream monastery found in the Garden of Zhou 80 years ago. However, they left in a hurry and did not have the time to take it with them, so they hid it under a tree by the river. Yi Xiaoyan angrily looked at the middle-aged cultivator and said, "This is something that belongs to my family, yet you actually dare to sneak attack and steal it. Do you have any shame?" The middle-aged cultivator's expression was slightly awkward. He was more than 50 years old this year, and had been in the ethereal opening realm for many years. If he had to use a sneak attack on two young girls who had just entered the ethereal opening realm not too long ago, it would not be good for his reputation. As a branch of the Orthodoxy, the Clear Void Monastery was not afraid of the retaliation of the South, even if it was the legendary Holy Maiden Peak. This was because the rules of the Garden of Zhou were set down by the saints. Since they had already shed all pretense of cordiality, it was only natural that the other side should withdraw from the Garden of Zhou as soon as possible. However, with the appearance of Chun, Changsheng, and Zhixiu, he could only withdraw his sword. 80 years ago, the senior Taoist nun of Gentle Stream Monastery entered the Garden of Zhou to explore its mysteries. She found a damaged magical artifact, but for some reason, she did not take it with her, and instead hid it under a tree. After she left the garden, she told this secret to her disciples, so that they could enter the Garden of Zhou and retrieve it. It was easy to imagine that behind this ancient story, there were definitely many secrets that were hidden, and it even made people sigh with sorrow. Chun Changsheng looked at the injured girl from the Holy Maiden Peak and asked, "Senior Tong, are you all right?" Similar to the Longevity sect, the Holy Maiden Peak also governed many sects and monasteries. For example, Yi Xiaoyan was from Gentle Stream Monastery. The girl's talent for cultivation was rather good, and perhaps next year she would be able to enter the South Stream Temple. The South Stream Temple did not have the rumored distinction between the inner and outer sections. It was only because Su Yurong was appointed as the next Holy Maiden of the South that she was a little special. According to the order of entry, Su Yurong should have called this girl surnamed Tong Senior. For some reason, Chun Changsheng very naturally called her Senior from the Mausoleum of Books all the way here. That Senior Tong stood up with Yi Xiaoyan support. The fingers that held her left shoulder were dripping with blood, and her face was somewhat pale. She shook her head and said, "It should be fine." Within the Mausoleum of Books, she was able to view the monoliths and comprehend and break through to ethereal opening in a month's time. Her talent for cultivation could be said to be very outstanding. For Yi Xiaoyan to also break through to ethereal opening was due to her good luck. However, the most important reason was the starlight that Chun Changsheng had attracted that night. The examinees of this year's grand examination were all very clear on this point. Therefore, disciples from Star Caesar Academy, Li Palace College, and Temple Seminary were jealous of Chun Changsheng and were also somewhat grateful. As for these two female disciples from the Holy Maiden Peak and the disciples from the other sects of the South, their feelings towards Chun Changsheng were much more complex. No one from the South liked Chun Changsheng, but they had to accept his favor. Yi Xiaoyan was only a little girl. Her way of thinking was much more childish and direct. Initially, when she had humiliated Chun Changsheng on the Divine Avenue, her attitude had gradually changed. After that night, in a Mausoleum of Books, there was only reverence and gratitude. Now, looking at Chun Changsheng's back, she felt much more at ease, as if she had found someone to rely on. She supported her senior and stood behind Chun Changsheng, staring at the master and disciple from Clear Void Monastery. The middle-aged cultivator naturally didn't care about the anger in her eyes. He only cared about Chun Changsheng's attitude. He believed that with his cultivation at the middle stage of ethereal opening, no matter how talented Chun Changsheng was, even if the youth with the cold aura beside him was the legendary wolf cub, he still couldn't defeat him. However, as a member of a branch family of the Orthodoxy, how could he not fear Chun Changsheng's Li Palace background? Taking advantage of the fact that Chun Changsheng hadn't had the time to say anything, he promptly said, "The Garden of Zhou is very large. Us two master and disciple still have to search for it. Principal Chun, we will take our leave." Senior Tong looked at Chun Changsheng and said apologetically, "Finding treasures in the Garden of Zhou depends on one's own ability. I originally didn't have the face to ask for Senior Chen's help, but that magical artifact is the beloved possession of a senior from the temple. Before this journey, she had someone bring a message for us to help her take it back. So please..." Her words stopped here because she also felt that this request was somewhat unreasonable. Chun Changsheng really didn't know what to do. The master and disciple from the Clear Void Monastery had launched a sneak attack to steal the object. Naturally, it couldn't be considered honorable, but the rules of the Garden of Zhou were as such. Moreover, they were a member of the Orthodoxy and didn't lack the slightest bit of etiquette towards him. On the contrary, Although he had an engagement with Su Yurong, he had no relationship with Holy Maiden Peak. North and south had always been different paths. How could he help the Southerners move against the Northerners? This was the first time he had encountered such a troublesome multiple-choice question. He only felt that the saints who had laid down these rules for the Garden of Zhou were truly loathsome. At this moment, an extremely austere sword intent came from the distant mountain forest. The expression of the middle-aged cultivator changed slightly. He clasped his hands towards Chun Changsheng and prepared to leave with his disciple. Senior Tong sighed lightly, but didn't say anything. Yi Shaolian, on the other hand, stared at Chun Changsheng with wide eyes, as if she didn't understand why he would let them leave just like that. She thought to herself, "You're the son-in-law of Holy Maiden Peak." But she completely didn't realize that by thinking this way, Chun Changsheng had already replaced Qiu Shanjun's previously seemingly irreplaceable position in her heart. Chun Changsheng looked at the master and disciple who were wading across the river, and finally made a decision. Yet at this moment, the leaves lightly swayed, and Zhuang Huanyu appeared on the riverbank. He looked at Chun Changsheng, his expression cold and indifferent. He didn't say anything, but his meaning was very clear. He would see what Chun Changsheng would do. "Thank you, everyone. I'm going to drink. I'll drink less. My body really isn't as good as it was in the past, but life still needs to find joy." Chapter 253. On the entire journey, Zhuang Huanyu had always been in his carriage, rarely showing his face. Perhaps he was intentionally avoiding Chun Changsheng. Chun Changsheng did not care about this person. He did not even know that he had also left the Mausoleum of Books, arrived at Hanxiu City, and entered the Garden of Zhou. But he knew very well why Zhuang Huanyu had appeared and why he was looking at him. He was the principal of the Orthodox Academy. Whether it was the attitude of the Li Palace or the instructions of the Archbishop before entering the garden, the cultivators of the northern sects should have regarded him as their leader. Of course, he had to be fair in handling matters. The problem was, at this moment, how could he handle matters that could be considered fair? He took a step forward, but was blocked by Zhixiu. Zhuang Huanyu's eyes revealed a mocking expression. Zhixiu's face remained expressionless as he slowly said, "You don't need to care about this matter." It was not that Chun Changsheng could not care, but that someone else would. The austere sword intent that had come from the distant forest did not belong to Zhuang Huanyu, but someone else. That master and disciple from the Clear Void Monastery were very clear on this point, so they were in a hurry to leave. At this moment, the austere sword intent arrived on the riverbank, directly breaking through the forest on the shore, and tyrannically chopped at the master of the Clear Void Monastery. The master's expression suddenly changed. With a fierce yell, he held his sword horizontally in front of his chest. Only an extremely clear sound of impact could be heard. Waves of qi violently surged from the riverbank, and the water splashed chaotically, revealing the pebbles at the bottom of the river. Only now did the crowd clearly see the sword that had flown out of the forest. Just as the sword was about to be blocked by the master of the Clear Void Monastery, it suddenly gave off a brilliant light, and its power suddenly rose, as if it wanted to cut the entire river in half. With a huge boom, all the water flowing in the river was jolted into the air. Countless pebbles rolled chaotically, and dust rose from the riverbank. The master of the Clear Void Monastery gave a muffled groan, as if his chest had been struck by a heavy blow. His knees bent slightly, and like a paper kite with its string cut, he flew towards the other side of the river, his feet leaving 2 clear marks on the ground. Only after he had retreated more than 10 zhong did he stop. His face was extremely pale, and a clear sword wound had appeared on his chest. Blood continuously flowed from the corner of his lips. The river water that had risen into the sky fell back down at this moment, splashing loudly. The temple head of the Clear Void Temple was completely drenched, looking very miserable. The young Taoist hurriedly ran across the river. What a domineering mountain spirit splitting cliff. Chun Changsheng looked at this scene and thought to himself. Back then, at the Ivy Festival, Qi Jian had used this Mountain Li sword technique against Tang 36, but at that time, Qi Jian hadn't reached ethereal opening yet. compared to the mountain demon splitting cliff that Tang 36 used, it was a completely different concept. He and Zheshio turned to look into the forest and saw Liang Xiaoxiao and Qi Jian walking out. "Where do you want to go?" The river began to flow again, but the sound of the water could not cover Liang Xiaoxiao's cold voice. On the other side of the river, the master and disciple of the clear void temple supported each other and prepared to leave. They were both at the middle level of ethereal opening, but the sword arts of Mount Li were much stronger than the sword arts of the clear void monastery. How could a nameless abbot of the clear void monastery be mentioned in the same breath as the divine state's 7 laws? There was no other way but to admit defeat. Hearing this, the master of the clear void monastery turned around and looked over. His pale face revealed anger, and he said, "What do you want?" Liang Xiaoxiao expressionlessly said, "Leave the item behind." The master of the clear void monastery clenched his teeth and threw over the damaged magical artifact in his hand. Liang Xiaoxiao still had no intention of letting them leave. He continued, "Then come and apologize." The master of the clear void monastery yelled, "Don't go too far. Don't rely on the strength of Mount Li to be so excessive." As he said this, he looked at Chun Changsheng. The rules of the Garden of Zhou were like this. The 2 senior and junior sisters of Holy Maiden Peak could not defeat him, so the magical artifact naturally belonged to him. He could not defeat Liang Xiaoxiao, so he naturally could not keep the magical artifact. So he asked himself if there was anything he needed to apologize to the Southerners. Liang Xiaoxiao seemed to not understand his meaning. He caught the magical artifact and, without hesitation, handed it over to Senior Tong of Holy Maiden Peak. The Southern Continent had the advantage of having the Longevity Sect and Holy Maiden Peak watching over and helping each other. It was only because of this that they were able to maintain their relative independence under the might of the Great Zhou and the Orthodoxy for so many years. The disciples of the 2 great sects would normally refer to each other as senior and junior, and it would not be an exaggeration to say that they were from the same sect. Liang Xiaoxiao gripped his sword and continued to walk toward the other side of the river. Chun Changsheng said, "His injuries are very heavy and he has no more strength to fight." This sentence did not mean that it was enough, but it meant that it was enough, that it was enough. Liang Xiaoxiao stopped and turned to look at Chun Changsheng, his eyes slightly cold. The Mount Li Sword Sect and the Orthodox Academy had countless entanglements that were difficult to resolve, and Liang Xiaoxiao was not like Go Hanshi and the others who had shared the same roof with Chun Changsheng. In his eyes, Chun Changsheng was an extremely loathsome person. Zheshio still stood in front of Chun Changsheng, his face expressionless. Although he was currently at the initial stage of ethereal opening, an entire level lower than Liang Xiaoxiao, there was no fear on his face, not even a hint of nervousness. Just like what he had said to Chun Changsheng in the forest outside the Mausoleum of Books, if he could fight to the death in the grand examination, he would not even fear Go Hanshi, let alone Liang Xiaoxiao, who was only ranked 3rd among the Divine State's 7 laws. This was the confidence that had been cultivated from seeing life and death and killing countless demons. Qi Jian looked at Zheshio, creased his brow, and walked to Liang Xiaoxiao's side. Liang Xiaoxiao looked at Chun Changsheng and said mockingly, "We didn't say anything before, and now you're pretending to be fair?" Chun Changsheng thought about it, but did not explain what he had been preparing to do. Senior Tong from Holy Maiden Peak did not want the 2 sides to clash because of her, so she gently tried to mediate. Liang Xiaoxiao said nothing, but the mockery on his face grew stronger and stronger. "Ever since the Mausoleum of Books, you've always seemed to be hostile to me." Chun Changsheng looked at him and seriously asked, "I don't understand why." Liang Xiaoxiao seemed to have heard an extremely stupid question. "I'm a disciple of the Mount Li Sword Sect. Isn't it normal for me to be hostile to you?" Chun Changsheng thought about it, then pointed at Zhuang Huanyu under the tree and said, "Then he's a student of the Heavenly Tao Academy. So why is he always hostile to me?" Liang Xiaoxiao said, "Perhaps you should consider, when the entire world is hostile to you, is it because you've done something wrong?" Chun Changsheng was silent for a while, then said, I've seriously considered this question and realized that it's also possible that this world is wrong. Qi Jin lightly pulled on Liang Xiaoxiao's sleeve. Liang Xiaoxiao's expression was indifferent, and he said no more. Chun Chang Sheng shook his head, waded across the river, and arrived at the side of the master and disciple from the Clear Void Monastery. Seeing the terrifying sword wound on the Clear Void Monastery master's chest, he said, "The injury is too severe. You have to leave." The young Taoist thought to himself that they had not even entered the Garden of Zhou for half a day, yet they had to leave without obtaining anything. His face immediately revealed an unwilling expression. Chun Chang Sheng said, "Previously, your master also said that this is the rule of the Garden of Zhou." The young Taoist looked at him and said indignantly, "You're an important figure of the orthodoxy. Why won't you help us?" Chun Chang Sheng did not reply, and continued to take the pulse of the Clear Void Monastery master. He lowered his head and said, "We have to hurry." The Clear Void Monastery master nodded his head weakly. His experience and knowledge were naturally different from his disciples. He knew that although Chun Chang Sheng had not helped him before, if he had not been there, he would definitely have been injured even more severely by the two young experts from the Mountly Sword sect. He took out the gray string from his waist, which he had obtained before entering the garden, and lit it with trembling hands. A faint green smoke rose from the burning string, slowly floating above the river, and then gradually disappearing into the sky of the Garden of Zhou. Chun Chang Sheng could faintly feel that this green smoke had merged into the sky, and the spatial barrier that separated the Garden of Zhou from the real world had begun to react. Logically speaking, spatial techniques were the most wondrous of realms. A single burning gray string was definitely not enough to transport a person to the gate of the Garden of Zhou that was several dozen li away. So these gray strings should have used the laws of the world of the Garden of Zhou, or even be a product of the Garden of Zhou from many years ago. The river slowly flowed, and the wet shore once again became dry. Although the young Taoist was still unwilling, he had no other choice. He knew that after his master left, he would definitely have to leave the Garden of Zhou, or else with his cultivation in sword arts, he would not be able to contend against the experts in the garden. Time slowly passed, and the gray string in the Clear Void Monastery master's hand gradually burned out. The river continued to flow, and the water grass continued to float. Nothing happened. The Clear Void Monastery master was still lying on the riverbank. Chun Chang Sheng was somewhat surprised and asked in confusion, could it be that the gray string lost its effect? Zhixiu slightly raised his eyebrows and looked at the young Taoist. The young Taoist stared blankly and then reacted. He took out his gray string from his waist and lit it. Because of his nervousness, his hands were somewhat trembling. After a while, the young Taoist's gray string also finished burning, but still nothing happened. He held the remaining string in his hand, and his face became somewhat pale. The Clear Void Monastery master's face became even paler. Liang Xiaoxiao's mountain spirit splits the rocks was too tyrannical. With just 2 moves, a terrifying sword wound had appeared on his chest, and blood was still constantly flowing out. If he could not return to the garden gate in time and ask the priests of the orthodoxy to treat him, his life might really be in danger. Just what is going on here? The young Taoist asked in panic, and subconsciously looked around. The forest by the river was quiet, but at this moment, it suddenly seemed somewhat sinister. What had happened here had finally alarmed the people on the other side of the river. Qi Jian, Liang Xiaoxiao, and the pair from Holy Maiden Peak walked over. Even Zhuang Huanyu walked over. There won't be any problems, right? My master, what about my master? He's still bleeding, he won't die, right? The young Taoist looked at Chun Chang Sheng, his face full of unease and expectation. Liang Xiaoxiao looked at the sword wound on the Clear Void Monastery master's chest and slightly frowned. The ethereal opening cultivators that entered the Garden of Zhou with a hope of humanity against the demons. How could the saints just watch them die so casually? The reason why the rules for entering the Garden of Zhou seemed so cruel and cold-blooded was precisely because no matter how bitter the battle was, or how sinister the human heart was, At the final juncture, the gray string could always be used to directly leave the Garden of Zhou. But now, the gray string had lost its effect. Chun Chang Sheng took out his box of needles and first helped the clear void monastery master stop the bleeding. Then he stood up and looked down the river into the distance. This chapter today, 3 chapters tomorrow. Chapter 254. The lower reaches of the stream were hills meandering along. Faintly, a distant plain could be seen. Nothing seemed to have changed from when they had first arrived, but Qin Changxing knew that something was definitely wrong with this world. Just as he was silently looking at this world, Zhuang Huanyu prepared to leave. It's best if you don't leave by yourself. Qin Changxing turned around, looked at him, and said seriously, "The gray string has failed. Something must have happened. It's best if we investigate clearly. Otherwise, I'm worried that something might go wrong." Zhuang Huanyu stopped, slightly raised his eyebrows, and said, "Sunday only opens for 100 days. Every moment inside is precious. Don't tell me you want me to waste time on such a small matter." Chun Changsheng said, "You've already spent time watching the battle. Why do you care about spending a bit more?" "Fine." Zhuang Huanyu looked at him and said, "If something really did go wrong, then of course we have to go to the garden gate to investigate. We're at least several dozen li away from the garden gate. Who's going?" Just as he had said before, every moment in the Garden of Zhou was incomparably precious to the cultivators that entered the garden. Going from the riverside where they were to the gate of the garden and back, even if they used up all their true essence, would still require at least an hour of time. Who would be willing to waste so much time on something like this? Qi Jian seemed to be somewhat moved and was about to say something, but Liang Xiaoxiao shook his head at the side. He thought of the heavy responsibility his master had entrusted to him, so he could only remain silent. The riverside was very quiet. No one responded. Zhuang Huanyu looked at Qin Changsheng and said with slight mockery, "You see, no one is willing to go. Since it was your idea, why don't you go?" Qin Changsheng did not directly answer him, but looked at the heavily injured master of Clear Void Monastery. Qi Jian understood his meaning and said, "I'll go." Then he looked at Liang Xiaoxiao and said something in a low voice. His attitude was very firm. "Fine. I think you can look in the forest, but it's best if you don't go too far." Chun Changsheng was very clear that these disciples that entered the Garden of Zhou were like that senior from Holy Maiden Peak. Most of them had missions from their sections. After saying this, he walked down the stream. Zhishio did not say anything and followed behind him. Arriving at the bend at the bottom of the stream, Chun Changsheng confirmed that the people on the riverbank could not see him, then said to Zhishio, "I'm going into the forest for a while. Wait for me here." Zhishio did not know what he wanted to do, nor did he want to pry into his secrets, so he indifferently nodded his head. After entering the quiet forest and climbing up the mountain, Chun Changsheng stopped and looked at the grassland that was burning under the sun and the mountain that extended into the depths of the grassland. His right hand grasped the hilt of the short sword at his waist and said in a low voice, "Can you help me and go check out the gate of the garden?" At some point, the black dragon had landed on his shoulder. As it gazed at the mountain in the distance, a strange light appeared in its eyes. It felt somewhat perplexed, as if there was something there that was attracting it. "I have a feeling that the gate to the garden is closed and we can't contact the outside world. So it doesn't matter if I go or you go. Just be careful on the road and don't let anyone see you." Qin Changsheng turned his head, looked at the black dragon on his shoulder, and earnestly requested. The black dragon retracted its gaze from the mountain and squeaked twice at him. Somewhat vexed, Chun Changsheng said, "I have things that you don't even care for. This sword was given to me by my senior brother, so I can't give it to you." The black dragon coldly looked at him, its meaning very clear. "You're not willing to pay any price, yet you still dare to ask me to do something?" Chun Changsheng thought it over, then said, "How about this? I'll agree to one of your requests. You know, I'm currently the principal of the Orthodox Academy. In the future, I might be able to get my hands on many strange treasures." The black dragon's slitted eyes slightly narrowed, apparently very satisfied with this answer. A cool breeze suddenly blew through the forest, accompanied by the ear-piercing sound of the air being torn apart. The black dragon transformed into a blur and instantly pierced through the air. In a short while, Chun Chang Sheng walked out of the forest. He looked at Zheshio with a grave expression and said, "The gate to the garden is closed." Zheshio slightly raised his eyebrows, but said nothing, nor did he ask how Chun Chang Sheng had found out about the situation of the garden gate in such a short amount of time. Returning to the riverbank, the other people had many questions about how Chun Chang Sheng had so quickly confirmed the news. Zhuang Huanyu's indifferent face revealed a hint of ridicule, and Liang Xiaoxiao directly asked, "If you say it's closed, then it's closed?" Chun Chang Sheng did not explain, saying, "If you believe it, then believe it." Without waiting for Liang Xiaoxiao and Zhuang Huanyu to continue asking questions, he crouched down and continued to treat the injuries of the master of the Clear Void Monastery. Qi Jian said, "I believe it." Liang Xiaoxiao looked at him and slightly frowned, as if he did not understand why his junior brother had so much trust in Chun Chang Sheng, an opponent of the Mountly Sword sect. Second brother said that if something happens in the Garden of Zhou, Chun Chang Sheng is the person he can trust the most. Qi Jian said. Chun Chang Sheng was currently taking the pulse of the master of the Clear Void Monastery, his fingers slightly stiff. When he had left the mausoleum of books, Go Hanshi had asked him to take care of the disciples of Mountly. At the time, he had thought that Go Hanshi was just being polite, but he did not think that Go Hanshi would actually really think this way. For some reason, he suddenly felt that his shoulders had become a little heavier, but his heart had become much more relaxed. This sort of feeling was very comfortable. After confirming that the injuries of the master of the Clear Void Monastery would not worsen too quickly, he stood up and asked Zheshio to prepare the tools for treatment. He said to Liang Xiaoxiao and the others, "I've confirmed that the laws of the Garden of Zhou have not been broken. It has only been disturbed by some sort of external power. Within 100 days, the gate should open again, but I don't know when it will open." Liang Xiaoxiao slightly frowned and said, "What sort of power could disturb a miniature world?" Qi Jian thought it over, then said, "Either the power is strong enough, or the person who used this power has an extremely deep understanding of the Garden of Zhou." Chun Chang Sheng nodded and said, "I believe it's the latter." Yi Xiaolian opened her eyes and asked curiously, "Who could it be?" Chun Chang Sheng and the others looked at each other, but did not say anything. Several hundred human cultivators had entered the Garden of Zhou, so the person who wanted to do something was obviously the enemy of humanity. The enemy of humanity was the demon race. "We have to be careful." Qi Jian looked at the plains below the river and said worriedly, "We have to think of a way to quickly notify the others." They were not sure, or perhaps they had never imagined, that there would be demons that would infiltrate the Garden of Zhou. However, since the Garden of Zhou had changed and the gray strings had lost their effectiveness, in order to prevent the human cultivators from being too ruthless and causing irreparable losses, they had to spread the news that the Garden of Zhou had closed as quickly as possible. However, the Garden of Zhou was just too vast. Several hundred human cultivators did not seem to be a small number, but when they were scattered within, they seemed extremely sparse. Moreover, since everyone's goal was to enter the Garden of Zhou to search for treasures, many people would presumably go into hiding. Under these circumstances, it was very rare for them to occasionally meet. The reason why these people would meet by the river was because they all had their own ideas regarding the sword pool. Regardless of whether it was the Orthodox Academy, the Mountly Sword Sect, or the Heavenly Tao Academy, they had probably all left behind some records regarding the sword pool. As a result, they had all gone against the current and arrived here. They were all well aware of this point. As for the master and disciple from the Clear Void Monastery, from the moment they entered the Garden of Zhou, they had been keeping an eye on this pair of martial sisters from Holy Maiden Peak. From a certain perspective, they truly were experienced and farsighted. The world of the Garden of Zhou was vast, divided into 3 large regions by 3 mountain ranges. That famous plain that no one had ever dared to enter was located in the center. At the edge of the mountain ranges and hills, which was also the edge of the Garden of Zhou, there were several gardens. These gardens were rumored to be Zhou ****'s residence in the past, so it was highly likely that he hid treasures there. As a result, when a normal cultivator entered the Garden of Zhou, they would first search those places. Liang Xiaoxiao said to Qi Jian, "Going to those places is too far and too time-consuming." He did not finish his sentence, but Qi Jian understood what he meant. In fact, everyone present also roughly understood what he meant. It seemed that the Mount Li sword sect was extremely confident in the information related to the sword pool, or perhaps in the past few decades, the elders of Mount Li had analyzed a few things. Liang Xiaoxiao and Qi Jian were obviously in a hurry to leave. In a mausoleum of books, Chen Changsheng had often treated Zhixiu, so Zhixiu was extremely familiar with that case. It did not take long for him to prepare all the items he needed. Chen Changsheng did not care about what the two brothers from the Mount Li sword sect were thinking. Taking the items, he squatted down and began to formally treat the clear void monastery master's wound. The copper needles entered the body, and the master's bleeding had already stopped. What he needed to do now was to stitch up the wound. Yi Xiaoyan glanced at it from the side, and her face could not help but pale. Even the hands of the young Taoist from the clear void monastery that were supporting his master began to tremble. As cultivators, whether they were exchanging pointers within the sect or fighting in the world, they had naturally seen blood. However, they had rarely seen a metal needle pierce through a human's flesh. After sewing up the sword wound on the clear void monastery master's chest, and then using a clean cloth to bandage it, Chen Changsheng did not end his treatment. Instead, he began to use the needles to clear the meridians in his abdomen that had been injured by Liang Xiaoxiao's sword intent. Seeing this scene, everyone's expression changed slightly, especially that Senior Tong from Holy Maiden Peak. Holy Maiden Peak's South Stream Temple, as well as the capital's 13 divisions of Radiant Green, were the sects of the cultivation world most skilled in treatment. In the past 1,000 years, in the bitter war between humans and demons, the figures of women dressed in white could always be seen. They had played an extremely important role in this war. She had not expected that she would be able to see such exquisite medical skills in the Garden of Zhou today, and Chen Changsheng had clearly not cultivated in the orthodoxy's sacred light technique. The riverbank was quiet, with only the gurgling of water and the occasional groan from the clear void monastery master. Everyone looked at Chen Changsheng, not daring to disturb him. Zhuang Huanyu did not like this sort of scene. Slightly raising his brows, he nodded at Liang Xiaoxiao, then walked upstream into the forest. Chen Changsheng saw this scene from the corner of his eyes, but he did not try to dissuade him. After a short while, he confirmed that the injuries of the clear void monastery master were not serious. He stood up, looked at Qi Jian, and said, "I also have to go. I have to think of a way to find other people. Just like you were worried, they still don't know about the Garden of Zhou's closure. Once a dispute arises, they will definitely not leave a path of retreat and will be extremely vicious. If that happens, problems will arise, and people might even die." Liang Xiaoxiao's expression changed slightly. He felt that these words were directed at him, but he did not understand that Chen Changsheng was only speaking of the matter as it stood. Qi Jian was somewhat embarrassed, and said, "We also have our reasons for leaving." "Understood." Chen Changsheng looked at the pair from Holy Maiden Peak, and said, "Can I trouble you to look after them for a while? I should be able to rush back before midnight." Senior Tong was slightly taken aback. She did not think that he would make such a request, but after thinking it over, she agreed. Previously, she had been ambushed, but now she had to look after them. If she was not a disciple of Holy Maiden Peak, she really would not have been able to accept it. Chen Changsheng smiled gratefully, then once again walked downstream with Zhixiu. The sun shone brightly, dispersing much of the sinister atmosphere of the forest. In the southeast of the Garden of Zhou, there was a garden built against a mountain. According to the rumors, this garden was built after the Zhou family became middle-aged, and because they liked the quiet and the chirping of birds, it was called the Mountainside Whispering Wood. The Mountainside Whispering Wood was not the garden at the entrance of the Garden of Zhou, but it was closest to the gate. Because every time cultivators entered the Garden of Zhou, the garden at the gate would first pass through that place, so it had long since been searched through countless times. It was impossible for later cultivators to pick up any leftovers, So this year, when cultivators entered the Garden of Jo, many of them first went to the mountainside whispering wood. The chirping of birds in the mountains was like music, the silent flowing water in the garden, the winding corridors, the flying eaves, the painted walls, and the windows. According to the iron laws of human cultivation, besides magical artifacts and legacies, the Garden of Jo's original furnishings were not allowed to be touched. As a result, even after several hundred years, this place still retains 70% of its tranquility and 90% of its nobility. However, in a certain room in the depths of the garden, there was only fear and unease. The tranquility and nobility had long since been washed away by the stench of blood. 10 some cultivators surrounded the room, their complexions extremely unsightly. A cultivator fell to the ground, his abdomen pierced by a sword, leaving a wound about 5 fingers wide. His left hand covered the wound, but he could not stop the blood from flowing out. It was even possible to see his intestines being squeezed out. He was already on the verge of death, and the gray string in his right hand had long since burned out, leaving behind only a little ash. Another cultivator's complexion was pale, as he incessantly said, "I didn't do it on purpose. I thought that perching on the tree would at most injure him. I didn't think that his true chi would freeze in that moment, and he wouldn't be able to raise his sword. I really didn't do it on purpose, and even if the gray string burns, it's useless." The injured cultivator's abdomen had been pierced through, and blood flowed freely. It seemed like he was on the verge of death. The surrounding cultivators grew more and more unsightly. What made them most uneasy was, why had the gray string lost its effect? Could it be that they could only watch as this person died? At this moment, several women dressed in white ceremonial robes arrived at the mountainside whispering wood. The garden resounded with shouts of pleasant surprise and greetings. One woman did not enter the room. She stood on the covered bridge, silently gazing at the sun gradually descending into the plains. It seemed like she had discovered something. Try to finish the next chapter before 11. Chapter 255. As the sunlight fell on the girl's face, her delicate and pretty face, which could not be described as beautiful, immediately became much more radiant and beautiful. She calmly gazed at the distant sun and thought about the things that had happened after entering the garden today. She had a rough idea of what had happened. At this moment, a white-clothed girl from the 13 divisions of Radiant Green hurried over and whispered, "That person's injuries are too severe, senior sister." The girl nodded, indicating that she should go first and that she would follow soon after. The girl from the 13 divisions of Radiant Green walked back into the house. Ignoring the objections of the injured disciple, she drove everyone out. Only then did the girl walk back into the house. 2 girls from the 13 divisions of Radiant Green were currently treating the injured disciple, but his injuries were too severe. The common healing methods of the Lee Palace were very difficult to use. No matter how hard they tried, they could not stop the blood from flowing from the disciple's abdomen. Seeing her arrive, the girls from the 13 divisions of Radiant Green immediately sighed in relief and hurriedly made way. The girl walked up to the injured disciple, glanced at him, then raised her right hand and placed it in the air above the disciple's abdomen. A faint green light fell from her palm. Like flowing water, it was even more gentle than flowing water, and it constantly fell on the injured disciple's body. The blood that had been flowing out of the disciple's wound suddenly stopped. Soon after, the light from the girl's palm changed color. From a pleasant and refreshing green, it turned into a sacred and solemn milky white. The pure white light shone on the disciple's abdomen, and the terrifying wound began to visibly heal. The Garden of Jo has a problem. I suspect that the gate to the garden has already closed. In a little while, have those cultivators choose the fastest one to go to the gate and see. The girl stood up and said to the girls, "After I leave, light up 2 fireworks. I believe that the people in the mountains and rivers should be able to see them." Whether it was Holy Maiden Peak or the 13 divisions of Radiant Green, they had always used fireworks on the battlefield. To cultivators and human armies, these 2 fireworks represented hope. Although they were currently in the Garden of Jo, They believed that those cultivators who had been injured in battle but could not pass through the gray line would think of a way to come to the mountainside whispering wood after seeing these two fireworks. A slightly older girl from the 13 divisions of Radiant Green worriedly asked, "Senior sister, what are you going to do?" "I'm going to do something," the girl said calmly, then turned around and left, looking at the back of the young girl disappearing into the depths of the garden. The women of the 13 divisions of Radiant Green were speechless. Only after a while did someone recall the miraculous scene they had just seen. A young girl said in admiration, "That's the sacred light technique, right? I really didn't expect senior sister to have cultivated the sacred light technique to such a level at such a young age. In my opinion, even teacher might not be able to do it." The sacred light technique came after, and it should have started with the natural light of Holy Maiden Peak. The slightly older woman smiled and said, "Senior apprentice sister will first study in our academy, then go to Holy Maiden Peak to cultivate. She is skilled in both the north and south, so she is naturally extraordinary." Night gradually approached, and the Garden of Zhou became slightly chilly. Especially in the foothills, there was a slight chill. The white robes of the 13 divisions of Radiant Green were rather thick, able to block out the wind and keep out the cold. The young girl was not worried about this. She seemed to be casually walking through the mountains, but in reality, she was searching for the cultivators that had entered the garden. She had the same opinion as Chun Changsheng and Qi Jian. No matter how powerful one was, it was impossible to truly change the rules of the miniature world that was the Garden of Zhou. The closing of the garden gate should only be a temporary matter. The problem was that the sudden closing of the Garden of Zhou would bring many dangers to the several hundred cultivators inside. These dangers came from within the human cultivators themselves, but also from other places. In front of the cliff, she met a student from the Starseeker Academy. That student was not injured in a fight, but when he was using his body technique, his Zhen Yuan had a problem, and he fell down from the cliff. Even after his body had been purified, he could not withstand the impact from that height, and his bones were fractured in many places. If she had not met him, he would have died. The night gradually deepened, and the mountain forest became rather gloomy. In the distance, one could faintly see the light emitted by a bonfire. It seemed that quite a few cultivators had already discovered the abnormality. They did not care what competitors they attracted, and only wanted to find companions as much as possible. At this moment, anyone in the Garden of Zhou could become their companion. The young girl walked towards the nearest bonfire, her white robes fluttering in the darkness. In the darkness of the Garden of Zhou, the most eye-catching things were those bonfires. It was just that some bonfires, perhaps because they were too far away, were very difficult to see. Chun Changsheng and Zhishou walked out of the forest. He looked at the bonfire on a nearby hill and said, "Let's start for nearby. There's no need to rush." Zhishou did not say anything. As a descendant of the wolf tribe, the thing he lacked the least was patience. Chun Changsheng very quickly thought of this and felt somewhat embarrassed. He then thought of another matter and asked, "There should still be quite a few magical artifacts left in the Garden of Zhou. If you follow me like this, don't you feel like you're at a disadvantage?" Zhishou replied, "And you? Don't tell me you don't care about being at a disadvantage?" Chun Changsheng replied, "When I think that the Mount Li sword sect might know the exact location of the sword pool, that Liang Xiao and Qi Jian are currently heading there, and that Zhuang Huanyu might even be able to find it, of course. I still care a little, but tonight, many people will definitely be injured and even die. I can't just ignore it." Zhishou looked into his eyes and seriously asked, "Why can't you just ignore it?" To this wolf youth that had grown up in the cruel snowy plains, any kind of benevolence was a fatal weakness. He really did not understand why humans and demi-humans could not just ignore it. A little soft-hearted, Chun Changsheng thought it over, then said, "I just can't bear it." Zhishou fell silent for a while, then said, "The responsibility of the strong is to make themselves even stronger. Only then can they protect even more of the weak." Chun Changsheng honestly said, "Maybe I don't have the self-awareness of an expert. Besides, since the Li Palace has me lead these people, I have to bear some responsibility, and it seems like I'm the only one here who knows how to treat illnesses." Zhixio said nothing more. Chun Changxing asked, "You still haven't answered my first question." Zhixio replied, "Tang Tang has paid, so I'm your bodyguard." Chun Changxing thought of that friend that was still in the mausoleum of books, thought of that yellow paper umbrella, and sighed. "It's really good to be rich," Zhixio finally said, "and I always feel that if I follow you, I won't be at a disadvantage." As they spoke, the two did not slow down. It didn't take long before they arrived at the top of the hill. They saw the bonfire and the people around it. From their clothes, they seemed to be two cultivators from the south. For some reason, they had fought with their swords, resulting in both sides suffering heavy injuries. Both of their bodies had several wounds. To Chun Changxing's surprise, these two southern cultivators were sleeping soundly. The wounds on their bodies had already healed. If not for the mottled bloodstains on their clothes, it would have been impossible to tell that they were injured. He walked up to the two southern cultivators and took their pulses. Then he opened their eyes and carefully examined them. Finally, he lifted up their clothes and looked at their wounds. Although their wounds could not be said to be as smooth as before, they were clearly fine. Their deep sleep was probably the result of smelling the soul-calming incense, which helped them recover. It's a senior sister from the 13 divisions of Radiant Green. She gave them the remembrance-severing incense. Chun Changxing stood up and said to Zhixio, "With someone helping to save people, we should be able to relax a little." Zhixio, however, shook his head. "It's not the 13 divisions of Radiant Green." Chun Changxing's expression changed slightly. He thought, "I'm well-versed in the Taoist canon and have a deep understanding of the methods of the 13 divisions of Radiant Green. For the wounds of these two southern cultivators to heal so quickly, with some divine qi still lingering on the edges of their wounds, it was clearly the orthodoxy's sacred light technique." Why did Zhixio say that it was not the 13 divisions of Radiant Green? The orthodoxy's sacred light technique was extremely difficult to cultivate. Even in the Li Palace, only 10-some bishops were able to use the sacred light technique at this level. Thus, he believed that the person who had treated these two southern cultivators was rather old, a senior sister, or even more likely a female professor. It was just that when he entered the garden, he had not noticed. It truly was the sacred light technique that healed their wounds, but the smell of the soul-calming incense isn't right. It's not the remembrance-severing incense of the 13 divisions of Radiant Green, but the least refined stainless dust of Holy Maiden Peak. Zhixio expressionlessly said to him, "I've smelled the former incense many times, and I've smelled the latter once. I won't forget it, so I can't be mistaken." Only now did Chun Changxing remember that when he hunted demons in the snowy plains of the north, he would often carry out extremely dangerous missions for the Great Zhou army. He had hovered on the edge of life and death countless times. In terms of understanding of the 13 divisions of Radiant Green and Holy Maiden Peak, these two great holy lands of healing, there truly weren't many people who could compare to him. To know the sacred light technique and also have the stainless dust at their side. Who is this? He muttered to himself. He thought to himself, to be able to understand the strengths of both the northern and southern sects, it must be an extraordinary senior. But how could this senior still be at ethereal opening? Zhixio calmly looked at him, saying nothing. Slightly surprised, Chun Changxing asked, "Why are you staring at me?" Zhixio looked into his eyes and asked, "Do you really not know? Or are you just playing dumb?" Chun Changxing stared blankly, and then he understood. For a moment, he couldn't help but stare blankly once more. One of the most important reasons he had entered the Garden of Zhou was to see that young lady and then personally return the marriage contract to her. It was just that so many things had happened after he entered the Garden of Zhou that he had actually forgotten about this matter, forgotten that she was also in the Garden of Zhou. To be able to understand the strengths of both the northern and southern sects, to be able to cultivate the sacred light technique to such a level at ethereal opening, and also to have the precious stainless dust at her side. In all these years, did it seem like she was the only one on the continent? He looked at Zhixio, somewhat at a loss as to what to do. It can't be. Zhixio expressionlessly looked at him and said, It is. Chen Changsheng said no more. Gazing at the dark mountains, he thought about how she had also stood here before, by the same bonfire. For some reason, he felt rather strange. Go, Zhishio asked. Chen Changsheng suddenly turned around and walked to the side of the two southern cultivators. Taking out his copper needles, he began to treat them. Zhishio was somewhat confused. He thought, since Su Yurong has already been treated, why do you need to do something unnecessary? The next chapter is even faster. I've already written several hundred characters. Every time I write about Chen Su, I feel an indescribable joy. Chapter 256. Using the sacred light technique to staunch the bleeding and regenerate the flesh, then using the stainless dust to calm the mind. Is that enough? These two still have so many chaotic masses of true essence in their meridians. If they don't think of a way to clean them out, when they wake up, their cultivations might drop by 30%. Some people think that just because they've learned a few techniques, they can treat illnesses and save people. It's truly not appropriate. Chen Changsheng moved the needles like the wind as he muttered to himself. Zhishio looked down at him and said, "You can replace the some people in the previous sentence with her." Chen Changsheng finished his work and stood up. He looked at him and explained seriously, "I'm not comparing anything with her." Zhishio very seriously replied, "I don't believe it." Chen Changsheng felt his face heat up and said no more. He prepared to wake these two southern cultivators and have them meet up with the others by the river. Just then, he saw that something had been drawn on the ground by the bonfire. After careful examination, he realized that it was a map and a simple line of words. The words aren't bad, he silently said to himself. She wants him to go to the mountainside Whispering Wood. It seems that many people are gathering there. Zhishio looked at him and asked, "Should we go?" Chen Changsheng did not even think, straightforwardly saying no. Zhishio asked why. "I still have things to do. There are still many people waiting for me to treat their wounds fine." Chen Changsheng stood up. After a long period of silence, he somewhat embarrassedly said, "I'm still not ready." The white ceremonial robes were particularly striking in the darkness. If they were on the streets of the common people, perhaps they would be very frightening. But in the eyes of cultivators, these white ceremonial robes were just like the specially marked fireworks of the 13 divisions of Radiant Green and Holy Maiden Peak. They represented the hope of survival and the end of pain. Along the way, the young girl had already heard two shouts filled with surprise and tears. So when she saw the cultivator next to the bonfire at the bottom of the grassy slope appear so calm, she was momentarily not used to it. A moment later, she understood why. It turned out that the cultivator was in meditation. She walked up and realized that the cultivator's wound had already been bandaged. From the angle of the wound and the way it had been bandaged, it was probably not her doing the treatment. She was about to turn around and leave, but she remembered something and squatted down again. She reached out to untie the bandages and observed the wound inside. This cultivator's wound should have been caused by some sort of magical weapon from the temple seminary. The skin around the wound still had remnants of what was commonly known as stardust. However, the stardust in the wound had been washed clean by the person who treated the wound, and the wound had also been treated very well. It was actually sewn together with some sort of thread. The young girl thought to herself that the person who treated her was truly bold. Although there were records of this in the Taoist canon and the medicinal encyclopedia, it had been many years since anyone had done this. There should be no problem with the external injuries, but she was more concerned about the problems in the meridians. Being injured by a ritual implement and being injured by a sword were two different concepts. A sword could injure the body, and a ritual implement could injure the body. The ritual implements in the cultivation world were not as sharp as a sword, and their lethality was mainly reflected in the damage to the internal organs, especially the meridians. After this cultivator's external injuries were healed, he had been meditating. Perhaps there was even a problem with his sea of consciousness. She placed her finger on the cultivator's meridian and slowly poured in an extremely pure strand of true essence. Stimulated by this strand of true essence, the cultivator awoke from his meditative state. Seeing the young girl so close to him, he jumped in fright and subconsciously wanted to attack. The Garden of Zhou, which had been set down by the saints with its cruel rules, was truly a good place for human cultivators to sharpen their will and increase their battle prowess. The young girl did not pay any attention to him. She said, "Don't move, don't speak, close your eyes." The cultivator did not recognize her, at least not the current her. For some reason, when he heard her voice that was like a clear spring, he felt incomparable trust. He subconsciously relaxed and closed his eyes once more. After a while, the young girl stood up. She did not stay any longer and walked into the darkness. The bonfire made her shadow rather long. The cultivator awoke once more. Looking at her back, he felt somewhat perplexed. In that fleeting glance, he saw a delicate but very ordinary face, one that was very easy to forget. Why was it that when he looked at the young girl's back, he felt that her beauty was somewhat soul-stirring? The young girl was also rather perplexed. The cultivator's meridians were extremely smooth. The jolts and blockages left behind by the magical artifact of the temple seminary had all been resolved. Of the several hundred cultivators of the Garden of Zhou, who was the most skilled in medicine? Who was the most skilled in this sort of method? Who was an ethereal opening that could make such minute adjustments to a cultivator's meridians? She was different from Chun Changsheng. She immediately thought of who it was. There's still some use. She silently thought to herself. Listening to the sound of water, she arrived at the riverside. Looking at the bonfire, she realized that there were two people she recognized. Seeing her, the two young girls were very surprised. Yi Xiaolian's eyes revealed an expression of reverence. Senior Tong smiled in relief. Everything could be changed. Only the expression in one's eyes could not be changed. Moreover, she had not deliberately changed it, so her fellow disciples recognized her. She shook her head. Yi Xiaolian and Senior Dong understood and said nothing. She walked to the master of the clear, void monastery and unwrapped his bandages. Glancing at him, her eyebrows slowly rose. "He treated you?" she asked Senior Sister Tong. Senior Tong cultivated with her in South Stream Temple, so she naturally knew of the matters between her and Chun Changsheng. For a moment, she did not understand the meaning behind her question. "I originally thought that he would be of some use, but who knew that he would treat him in such a mess? He only treated the sword wound on the outside, but the inside is still bleeding. Does he not care?" For some reason, the more the girl thought, the angrier she became. The master of the clear void monastery was currently very weak. He simply did not know what had happened, and his disciple was even more confused. He only saw the attitude of those two disciples from Holy Maiden Peak and knew that the person who had come could not be offended. The girl extended her right hand and lightly brushed his abdomen. A pure and holy ray of light descended from her palm. No matter how remote the clear void monastery was, it was only a branch of the orthodoxy. How could the master not recognize the sacred light technique? He was instantly moved. He was even more certain that this girl was an extraordinary figure of the orthodoxy. He hurriedly rose to pay his respects. The girl slightly creased her brow and directly knocked him out. The disciple of the master of the clear, void monastery stood to the side in a daze. He did not dare to speak, much less do anything. After learning some medicine from Taoist Ji, did he think that he could cure everyone in the world? Did he not even think about it? Were cultivators and ordinary people the same thing? Were sword wounds and cold the same thing? The girl angrily thought of these things. She turned to Senior Tong and asked, "When will he return?" Senior Tong calculated the time. It was not far from the time Chen Changsheng had mentioned. She said, "He should be back soon." The girl froze, then stood up and walked into the darkness. Senior Tong asked, "You are not waiting for him?" The girl did not answer. She quietly left, startling a few night birds in the forest. The next 2 days will probably be a little less updated, because I will have to go out. Chapter 257. Watching the girl disappear into the dark forest, Yi Xiaolian tilted her head and thought for a while. In the end, she could not suppress the question in her heart and softly asked, "Just who does Senior Su like?" Senior Tong looked at her and asked with a smile, "If it were you, what would you choose?" "If it were in the past, I would obviously choose Senior Qiushan, but now, Yi Xiaoyan very seriously said, and then for some reason, she felt very sad. Qin Changsheng did not know what sort of impact his existence had on this little girl's outlook on life and love. He and Zhixio were still walking through the forest in the darkness, searching for cultivators who had been injured in battle and treating their wounds. In this process, he did not display anything special, but Zhixio still realized that when he encountered an injured person who had been treated by Su Yorong, Qin Changsheng would clearly stay a little longer, and he would clearly be much more attentive when treating them. Similarly, that girl was also walking through the darkness, searching for people to treat. Similarly, for some reason, whenever she saw an injured person that Qin Changsheng had treated, she would feel especially uneasy and would stay longer. The Garden of Zhou in the darkness was very quiet. There were no stars in the night sky, but the little bonfires on the ground diluted the monotony. The young man and girl walked back and forth between stars. Whether it was intentionally avoiding each other or the arrangement of fate, they met many injured people that had been treated by each other, but they did not meet even once. They were in different places, doing different things. They did not see each other, but they knew who the other was. The bandages on the injured person's legs, the residual true essence in their meridians, and the divine qi at the edges of their wounds were like letters or simple notes, conveying some sort of message, telling each other what they had done, vaguely competing with each other in a fit of pique. Similarly, for some reason, in the middle of the night, Qin Changsheng returned to the riverside as promised. Looking at the sleeping master of Clearstream Monastery, he confirmed that she had been here before. After a moment of silence, he faintly felt some admiration. He had no way of treating those internal injuries. He could only let the injured endure and slowly recover. It truly was not as effective as her methods. It was just that tonight, he had already treated 20-some patients. She had probably treated quite a few as well, perhaps even a little more. Whether it was the orthodoxy's sacred light technique or the methods of Holy Maiden Peak, they all consumed a great deal of true essence. If she continued to treat them without regard for her strength, would she still be able to endure? When human cultivators entered the Garden of Zhou to seize treasures, according to the rules set down by the saints, they were willing to stop at nothing. Therefore, even if it was only the first day, there had already been many battles. The cruel battles brought about bitter consequences. The failure of the gray threads made those injuries seem even more frightening. Fortunately, Qin Changsheng and her, as well as the women from the 13 divisions of Radiant Green, had continuously treated several dozen people. At the very least, no one had died up until now. There were no deaths, so the atmosphere between the cultivators was relatively calm. Otherwise, the hatred would not be resolved, especially in the context of the confrontation between the North and South. No one knew if chaos would break out. The first night after entering the Garden of Zhou slowly passed in a slightly tense and silent atmosphere. The morning light shone on the grassland and the mountain range. The morning in the Garden of Zhou was no different from the morning in the outside world. The rising sun was also no different from the setting sun. The mountain range that extended into the grassland, under the warm red light, was like a giant dragon proudly raising its head. This was the legendary Sunset Valley. At the peak of Sunset Valley, an old man faced the morning sun and was currently playing the zither. The sound of the zither sobbed, as if he was paying homage to something. Behind the zither-playing old man was a little girl around 10 years old. She was currently hugging her knees and staring blankly at the new morning sun. She was truly in a daze. There was no emotion in her indifferent face, making her look rather pitiful. However, what was strange was that no matter how gentle the morning sun's light was, it would still be dazzling. However, she just stared with her eyes wide open. Let alone a stinging or sore reaction, she did not even narrow her eyes. Qin Changsheng's medical skills are superb, and Su Yurong's even more so. Moreover, their reactions were too timely. Last night, the Garden of Zhou actually did not fall into chaos. The zither-playing old man walked in front of her and said in a harmonious voice, "My lord, Little Wolf, and Qin Changsheng are together." Let's kill them first." The old man's words were said very lightly, as if he said that he wanted to kill Chen Changsheng and Zhishio together. Then he would definitely be able to kill them. Only those at ethereal opening could enter the Garden of Zhou. If that was the case, then no matter how strong this old man was, he was only at the peak of ethereal opening, while Chen Changsheng was already at the upper level of ethereal opening. Although Zhishio was only at the initial level of ethereal opening, his strange bloodline talent and battle prowess tempered in the snowy plains were definitely far beyond this. Just where did his confidence come from? The little girl continued to hug her knees and stared blankly at the warm red morning sun. She did not reply to the zither-playing old man's words. No reply meant that she did not approve, but silence never meant agreement. When a milord did things, he was always very direct. The zither-playing old man understood this very well. He advised, "According to the military advisor's plan, we should take advantage of the internal strife of the human cultivators in the Garden of Zhou last night to kill them. If the Garden of Zhou is not in chaos, then we should act according to the plan." The little girl's expression was indifferent, and her gaze even seemed somewhat lifeless. She stared at the morning sun and said, "I want to kill her." The zither-playing old man knew who the milord spoke of was. The milord had risked his precious body to enter the Garden of Zhou precisely to kill that human girl. He continued to advise, "Su Yurong is not an ordinary person." He almost said the four words that the little girl hated to hear the most. He could not help but feel some lingering fear. After calming himself down, he continued, "Even if she continuously used the sacred light technique last night and consumed a lot of her true essence, she is still not easy to kill. According to the military advisor's plans, we should first kill the others, then work together to kill Su. Only then will there be no accidents." Hearing the two words, military advisor, the little girl fell silent for a while. After a while, she still shook her head and repeated, "I want to kill her." She wanted to kill Su Yurong. She wanted to kill Su Yurong. She only wanted to kill Su Yurong. The other human cultivators, in her eyes, were all trash. How could they be worth even a glance? As he awoke to the sound of water, Chen Changsheng felt a wave of soreness in his body. Last night, in order to save people, he had run at least several hundred li. Even though his body was now incomparably valiant, he still found it somewhat difficult to endure. Most importantly, he felt a sense of mental exhaustion. It constantly assaulted him like a tide and was truly somewhat difficult to bear. The morning light was already shining brightly. It had actually long since past 5 o'clock. Chen Changxing got up and walked to the riverside. He cupped some slightly cold water and washed his face, somewhat clearing his mind. Taking the dry rations that Zhishio handed over, he began to silently eat. Last night, there were cultivators that were either injured or alone. Following his orders, they had gathered by the riverside. Now that those people had awoken, the scene immediately became rather lively. Chen Changsheng finished his dry rations and drank some water. He then sat for a while, dispelling his mental and physical exhaustion. Only then did he stand up. The sword wound on Senior Tong's shoulder had been treated by him last night and was now basically healed. The master of the Clear Void Monastery had also recovered somewhat. Although he still could not walk on his own, his life should not be in any danger. The other cultivators had either suffered heavy or light injuries, but they were all right. After a night of rest, they should be able to endure until they returned to the garden near the gate. Chen Changsheng walked up to Senior Tong and softly explained the arrangements for today. Senior Tong nodded her head. Chen Changsheng wanted to say something, but hesitated. In the end, he still could not restrain himself and asked, "Last night, did she come over and say anything about me? Or did she leave a message for me?" Senior Tong thought about the angry words she had said to herself last night by the riverside and could not help but laugh. She said she did not specifically leave a message. For some reason, Chen Changsheng felt somewhat relaxed and somewhat disappointed. Just at this moment, a cry of alarm suddenly came from the forest by the riverside. Chen Changsheng, Zhishio, and 10 some other cultivators rushed over upon hearing the cry, quickly arriving at the place where it had come from. They saw an expert of the Heavenly Bestowal sect standing in the forest, his face deathly pale. At his feet was a middle-aged man with a deathly pale face, no longer breathing. Dead. Someone had died. What's going on here? Could it be that Sect Master Fei did not manage to hold on? Could it be that someone entered the forest last night and took advantage of Sect Master Fei's injuries to kill him? The forest resounded with the angry and somewhat panicked voices of the crowd. As cultivators that walked the world, even if the people present were not used to seeing death, at least death would not bring too much of a mental blow. However, the closing of the Garden of Zhou had already cast a shadow over everyone's hearts. Moreover, the middle-aged man who had died was the sect master of the Heavenly Bestowal sect. The Heavenly Bestowal sect was an unknown small sect of the southern sects, but the status of the sect master was still there. Moreover, last night, the sect master surnamed Fei had not been heavily injured. With his cultivation at the middle level of ethereal opening, he should have been able to easily endure it. How could he have died so silently? Qin Changsheng walked up to the dead sect master Fei and squatted down. He took the gloves that Zhishio handed over and put them on. He opened the dead man's eyes, then looked at his nose and mouth. Using a copper needle, he pierced it into the back of the neck, took it out, and observed it for a while under the sunlight. His expression gradually became serious, and he said, "It's poison." Hearing his words, the crowd immediately became even more nervous. Who had used poison? That person was actually able to hide from so many people and stealthily enter the forest to poison sect Master Fei to death. Didn't that mean that as long as that person wanted to, they could poison anyone present at any time? Most importantly, why did that person want to poison sect Master Fei to death? It must be someone from the shaman sect. A southern cultivator hatefully said, "Yesterday, when I entered the garden, I saw a few shamans. I don't know what the Li Palace and Holy Maiden Peak are thinking. They actually let these monsters that like to use witchcraft and poison into the Garden of Zhou." Qin Changsheng shook his head and said, although it really was grass poison, the poison did not seem to be from the plants of the south. Then who do you think poisoned him? The expert from the Heavenly Bestowal sect, because of his sorrow and anger, actually ignored Qin Changsheng's status and stared at him and loudly rebuked. "Last night, Senior said that you didn't need to treat him, but you insisted on treating him. You even had us come here, but in the end he died. Who knows if you did something while treating him?" Hearing these words, the forest suddenly quieted down. See you tomorrow. Chapter 258. Regarding the copper needles used to detect poison, it was obviously not because of blood. He had always used the needles on meridians and acupuncture points. This world is not the same as our world. Of course, I admit that when I wrote it, I did not think about this at all. The reason why the forest had suddenly become so quiet was not because of the Heavenly Bestowal sect experts' words that had exposed everyone's thoughts. No one believed that Qin Changsheng would use this opportunity to secretly poison someone, because there was no reason for it. No reason at all. Everyone knew that Qin Changsheng was deeply favored by the Pope and supported by the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education. At such a young age, he had shocked the world into becoming the Orthodox Academy. No matter how one looked at it, his future prospects were limitless. Compared to this future, no benefit in the Garden of Zhou could possibly drive him to do such a thing. The silence was because everyone wanted to know how Qin Changsheng would react to such an unreasonable accusation. Qin Changsheng did not react at all. The Heavenly Bestowal sect experts' reddened eyes and almost twisted face from grief were all in Qin Changsheng's eyes. He and Zheshio turned and walked out of the forest. Senior Tong and Yi Xiaoyan came to greet them, their faces filled with worry. Qin Changsheng explained the situation in the forest to them, then left the stream bank with Zheshio, once again entering the vast world of the Garden of Zhou. Not long after they left, Senior Tong and two other famous cultivators led the other cultivators, supporting each other toward the garden at the gate of the Garden of Zhou. A stretcher had appeared in the middle of the group. The dead sect master, Fei, lay on it with his eyes closed. From time to time, the sound of sobbing could be heard from the stream bank. Standing on a huge rock between the cliffs, Qin Changsheng felt relieved as he looked at the procession that was heading downstream. There's a problem with your way of handling things. Jishio expressionlessly said. When a disagreement appears in the group, no matter what method you use, you should suppress it. If you want to survive, obedience is the most important thing. Chen Chongqing said nothing. He turned and entered the dense forest. The search and treatment continued. More and more human cultivators were gathered together, separated into 3 gardens. Moreover, they had already established contact with each other. The problem was, as long as the Garden of Zhou could not open, did everyone have to remain in these beautiful, yet treasureless gardens? In the next 2 days, even more terrifying things happened. Several more cultivators died mysteriously. They were still poisoned, but no matter if it was the people who traveled with them or the people who investigated afterwards, they could not find the cause. As time passed, the pressure on the people grew greater and greater. Some people might collapse, some people might become numb, and even more cultivators might leave the 3 gardens once again and enter the world of the Garden of Zhou to search for the magical artifacts and legacies that were incomparably precious to cultivators. This was because, in their view, staying together with other people was even more dangerous. Yes, many cultivators had already begun to suspect that all of this was a scheme of the demons. But even at this very moment, no one believed that the demons could infiltrate the Garden of Zhou. It must be known that the solitary drunk under the moon, Zhu Luo, was standing guard at the entrance of the Garden of Zhou. There is also the Archbishop Mei Lisha leading a group of priests from the Orthodoxy to verify the identities. Even the most mysterious demon military advisor, Blackrobe, would not have the ability to sneak in. Since there were no demons in the Garden of Zhou, the danger naturally came from the humans themselves, between them. Chen Chongsheng dipped his feet into the cool water and let out a comfortable sigh. To him, running a distance of nearly 1,000 li in 2 days was an extremely exhausting task. His clothes were covered in dust, and his face was filled with exhaustion. Compared to him, Zheshio was clearly much more valiant. It was as if this wolf youth did not know what fatigue was. Chen Chongsheng looked at the small white fish in the depths of the stream and said, I still don't believe that there's a traitor. Zheshio said, for people have already been poisoned to death. Since we've confirmed that there are no demons in the Garden of Zhou, then the person who poisoned them is definitely a traitor. This was an extremely simple and clear deduction. However, Chen Chongsheng still found it very difficult to accept. The alliance of humans and demi-humans against the demons was a war of extermination. Very few traitors would appear on either side. Although the war has always been going on the edge of the snowy plains for the vast majority of living beings on the continent, it has already been many years since there has been a war. Many living beings have long forgotten the terror of the demons, forgotten that this is a war of extermination. Zheshio said with an emotionless expression, in the snowy plains, I've seen many dear people acting as guides for the demons. It's not strange that there are traitors among the human cultivators in the Garden of Zhou. After a moment of silence, Chen Chongsheng said, I've never wanted to admit that there are traitors because everyone has already begun to suspect each other. I believe this kind of distrust is even more dangerous. Zheshio had to admit that playing with people's hearts had always been the most terrifying aspect of the demons. The demons simply did not need to enter the Garden of Zhou. They only needed to sever the connection between the inside and outside of the garden, and then have traitors fan the flames and do some sinister things. Then, the human cultivators would fall into chaos. This sort of thing had happened many times in history. Chen Chongsheng continued. These several hundred ethereal opening cultivators are the future of humanity. There are many outstanding and powerful people among them. The number of traitors that the demons can bribe cannot be too many. So as long as these several hundred cultivators do not suspect each other, be vigilant, or even confront each other, as long as their hearts do not scatter, the demons will not be able to do anything. Zheshio expressionlessly said, if you could do this, you humans would have long ago unified the continent. Chen Chongsheng was silent. Based on his observations over the past 2 days, especially today in the mountainside Whispering Wood, he could confirm that the hearts of these several hundred cultivators had already scattered. He was the leader of the group entrusted with the heavy responsibility of the Li Palace. So the cultivators of the northern faction of the Orthodoxy had the responsibility to look after them. Go Hanshi's high regard made his responsibility even heavier. But if the hearts of the people scattered, how could he lead the group? As long as we stay in the garden, we should be fine. The people that were poisoned to death all died in the mountains, so let's not worry about these people for now. We have to hurry and find the others. Chun Sheng took his feet out of the stream and stood on the rock, drenched. He gazed at the other two foothills that could be faintly seen on the horizon. He had already counted the number of cultivators that had been found and gathered in the garden. There were still around 100 people missing from the total number of people that had entered the garden. There are some people that you don't want to find, so how will you find them? Zhixiu expressionlessly said, like Liang Xiao, Qi Jian, Zhuang Huanyu, and those upper-level ethereal opening experts of the various sects, I haven't seen a single one of them. Sheng shook his feet, put on his shoes, and tied up his hair again. Even if the demons really did bribe a few spies, they wouldn't dare to act against these people. Zhixiu replied, but they're definitely watching from the shadows. Chun Sheng thought of Go Hanshi's request in the Mausoleum of Books and said, let's go to the sword pool and take a look. Even if he could not meet up with Qi Jian and Liang Xiao, if he could find the sword pool, that would still be a very good thing. After arduously rushing about for 2 days and 2 nights, he felt that he had the right to consider things for himself. Chun Sheng and Zhixiu left the stream bank and walked into the forest. They would consider the dangers hidden in the mountains for the other cultivators, but they did not seem to be worried about their own safety, because they were all youths. Although they did not seem hot-blooded on the surface, they were never lacking in self-confidence. As they embarked on this journey together, they were naturally fearless. On the other side of the mountain range, the young girl in white robes was also walking. She was alone, but she was still fearless, her expression calm. At some point, a bough had appeared on her shoulder. When they arrived at the first stream, they followed the same old path, going upstream. They passed by the place where the master of the Clear Void Monastery had fought with Holy Maiden Peak's Senior Tong. Chun Sheng and Zhixiu did not even glance at the black bloodstains left on the riverbank. They silently continued forward, not speaking for a very long time. The two of them were not good at talking, nor did they like to talk. In the past 2 days, the conversations they had in the Garden of Zhou could already be considered frequent. In a quiet forest, the occasional cry of a bird could be heard. Those were creatures that had been startled awake by their footsteps. Chun Sheng had seen records in the Taoist canon that many years ago, someone had found the sheath of an ancient sword in this forest. Liang Xiao, Qi Jian, and Zhuang Huanyu had all disappeared in the upper reaches of this stream, further confirming his judgment. If the Garden of Zhou really did have a sword pool, it should be in this direction. For the Mount Li sword sect to want to find the legendary sword pool was too natural. At this time, Chun Sheng and Zhixiu did not know that the saying that no one had ever seen a sword in the Garden of Zhou was wrong. Many years ago, Mount Li's junior martial uncle surnamed Su had once found a sword here and brought it out of the Garden of Zhou. However, for some unknown reason, this matter didn't spread. The amount of water in this stream was not very plentiful, especially as they went upstream. After passing through several tributaries, the flow of the water slowed down, becoming as clear as a mirror. However, this stream was very long. The two of them had started walking in the early morning, and only when the sun was high in the sky did they finally reach the end. Just like many other streams, the end of this stream was also a cliff, and a silver waterfall poured down from the cliff. Below the waterfall was a quiet pool. As the water fell into the pool, it constantly emitted a low roar. Zhixiu raised his head and squinted at the top of the waterfall. Under the blazing sunlight, the shallow layer of water at the edge of the cliff seemed as transparent as colored glass. He confirmed that this was the peak of the mountain. I'll go up and take a look. After saying this, without waiting for Chun Sheng's response, he rushed towards the cliff. While he was still on the way, his body suddenly lowered. With a whoosh, he transformed into a gray shadow and jumped onto the cliff, that was over 10 zhang high. With a flash, he rapidly ran between the cliffs. In just a moment, he had reached the top of the cliff. Chen Chang Sheng watched from below. He could faintly see that as Zheshio rushed forward, his two hands seemed to emit a cold light. Zheshio's figure disappeared above the waterfall. He was probably going to investigate the true source of the mountains and rivers. Chen Chang Sheng withdrew his gaze and looked at the pool under the waterfall. His heart was slightly moved. This place was already the peak of the mountain. The mountain had a spring, so the amount of water could not be too great. This was also what he and Zheshio saw. The waterfall was very thin and the amount of water was very small. So why was the pool below so deep? He walked to the edge of the pool and looked into the water. All he could see was a gloomy darkness. He could not see the bottom at all. He calmed his mind and slowly released his spiritual sense, probing the bottom of the pool. His spiritual sense sank into an unknown distance. Suddenly, he felt a slight pain in his eyes, as if a thin leaf had scraped them. He closed his eyes and began to cry. It was a strand of sword intent. Although it was indistinct and hard to grasp, he was very sure that it was a strand of sword intent. For the past few days, it had been the first watch. After returning on the 25th, I whipped my horse. Chapter 259. Standing on the shore of the pool, Chen Changsheng remained silent for a very long time. The sword intent lingered in his eyes, and the pain was difficult to remove, causing him to constantly shed tears. At this moment, he seemed like an idiotic youth gazing at the reflection of the pool and feeling sorry for himself. The sword intent in the depths of the pool made him very shocked, very surprised, and also somewhat perplexed. Could it be that this seemingly ordinary waterfall and pool was the legendary sword pool? Or else how could there be sword intent coming from the depths of the pool? But if it really was like this, why had no one discovered it in the past several hundred years? It had to be known that although this sword intent was elusive and hard to grasp, it was very clear. His perplexity originated from his ignorance, his own ignorance. The sword intent that came from the depths of the pool was actually extremely faint and difficult to sense. Even a cultivator at the peak of ethereal opening would not be able to catch a trace of its existence. And only ethereal opening cultivators could enter the Garden of Zhou. So in the countless years, this sword intent had never been discovered by anyone. Until a certain day in a certain month of a certain year, a cultivator with extraordinary talent and a natural affinity for the sword stood on the shore of the pool. His eyes were touched by this sword intent, and his mind was shocked. Thus, the first curtain on the legend of the sword pool was lifted. That person was the junior martial uncle of Mount Li, Su Li. Why could Chen Changsheng sense this sword intent? Because his body and mind were both pure. Although the strength of his spiritual sense could not be said to be unparalleled in the world, its gentleness and steadiness was not something that ordinary cultivators could compare to. On that night, when he fixed his fated star in the library of the Orthodox Academy, even the divine empress on the dew platform fell silent. As a result, he became the second person in the past several hundred years that had entered the Garden of Zhou to sense this sword intent in the depths of the pool. But where did this sword intent come from? Chen Changsheng controlled his spiritual sense to dive deeper into the pool, but he discovered that the water was rather strange. There seemed to be some sort of tangible pressure in the depths that actually prevented his spiritual sense from continuing forward. Standing on the shore of the pool, he lightly stroked the hilt of his sword. Looking at the little black dragon that had at some point rested on his shoulder, he said, "Why don't we?" The black dragon looked at him, its eyes filled with coldness and ridicule. Its meaning was very clear. "I'm not your subordinate, so why should I help you with so many things?" Chen Changsheng couldn't help but say, "Why are you the same as Zheshio? No matter what you do, you never forget to ask for benefits." The black dragon was infuriated when it heard this. It gently swung its tail and prepared to return. It thought to itself, what audacity! He actually dared to compare me to a wolf. All right, I'll agree to one more request," Chen Changsheng said helplessly. Only then was the black dragon satisfied. It swung its tail again and turned into a black shadow. With a chi sound, it disappeared into the cold pond water. A moment later, the black dragon broke out of the water, bringing with it a splash. Under the sunlight, the black dragon looked like a shattered crystal. Chun Chong Sheng raised his right arm and let it rest on his forearm. The stream water dripped off the scales of the little black dragon and soaked his sleeve. It was rather cold and felt rather strange. Through the information transmitted by the black dragon, Chun Chong Sheng knew that there was a cave at the bottom of the pond. It should lead to some place behind the cliff, but this cold pond was indeed rather strange. The deeper one went, the greater the pressure. Moreover, it was an enormous pressure that did not conform to the situation in the real world. The black dragon was currently in a state of soul separation and possessed less than 1% of its true strength, so it had no way of passing through the cave. For the black dragon to be able to find the cave was already rather difficult. If it were a human cultivator at ethereal opening, it would basically be impossible. Chun Chong Sheng stood by the pond, sensing the still faint sword intent. He pondered for a long time, then raised his head to look above the waterfall. Calculating the distance, he had an idea. He let the black dragon rest and walked to the side of the waterfall. He began to climb up the cliff. His movements were not as wild and wanton as Zhuxiu's, but they were steady and accurate, displaying an extremely powerful strength. Passing through the waterfall, he arrived at the top of the cliff. He took out a handkerchief and wiped away the foam on his face. He discovered that in front of him was a clear pond. The bottom of the pond was made of yellow stone, and the water continued forward. It should be several hundred zhang away on the other side of the cliff. He could faintly see the undulations of the water in the middle, which should be the source of the mountain spring. The scene was very beautiful. At this moment, Zhuxiu concluded his distant investigation and walked back. He shook his head, indicating that he had not discovered anything. There's a cave at the bottom of the pond. It should lead to some place in the mountain. I suspect the sword pool is inside. Chun Chong Sheng stood at the edge of the waterfall and pointed at the fist-sized pond under his feet. Zhuxiu walked to his side and glanced at the pond below. He said, "I expressed my doubts about this." Chun Chong Sheng asked, "Then what do you think is over there?" Zhuxiu said, "In the stories, when one encounters a desperate situation and suddenly finds a passage, the first scene upon entering a new world is often that of a beautiful woman coming out of a bath." "You're thinking too much." Chun Chong Sheng was speechless. He changed the subject. "But the pond is rather strange. There shouldn't be a way to dive down. I have to think of a way." Zhuxiu once again glanced at the distant pond and said, "It seems that you've already thought of a way. If I jump down from here and use the momentum of the fall, I might be able to directly fall into that cave." Chun Chong Sheng did not say that with the help of the black dragon, he already knew the distance between the cave and the surface of the pond. After a rough calculation, there shouldn't be any problem. Zhuxiu glanced at the pond again and slightly creased his brow. He said, "Are we going to risk our lives?" This cliff was too high. Even he felt that he had no confidence that he wouldn't be knocked unconscious by the pond water. Chun Chong Sheng said, "I should be able to hold on, but I don't know if you can." He did not know that he had bathed in the blood of the black dragon's true dragon, but he knew that the toughness of his body even surpassed that of a cultivator who had undergone a perfect purification, so he was not worried. Zhuxiu's bloodline was special, and he had successfully undergone a purification. Moreover, he had been cruelly fighting in the snowy plains since he was a child. It could truly be said that his muscles and bones were like stone. However, he really did not have much confidence in this height. He said, "If Liang Xiao and Qi Jian went from this pond to the other side, how'd they get there?" Chun Chong Sheng really hadn't thought about this problem. He scratched his head and said, "Perhaps the Mountly Sword sect has some strange method? Then what about Zhuang Huanyu?" Zhuxiu continued to ask. Chun Chong Sheng was a little surprised. He said, "The Heavenly Academy also has a secret method?" Zhuxiu looked at him expressionlessly and said, "With your current status in orthodoxy, do you think that Mao Qiuyu wouldn't tell you if the Heavenly Academy has a clue about the sword pool?" Chun Chong Sheng was speechless at his question. He even became a little anxious. He said, "In any case, I can get there. Just tell me if you can or can't." As a man, even though he was not yet a fully grown man, he still could not say the word can't. Zheshio said expressionlessly, "See you over there." After saying this, he walked to the edge of the waterfall and jumped in without hesitation. His figure quickly descended from the cliff. The waterfall was shattered and several strands of jade flowed down. Qin Changsheng looked at this scene and could not help but be stunned. He silently thought to himself, "This straightforwardness really caught me off guard." There was only a boom. There was a huge splash on the surface of the pool. In the middle of the splash, the surface of the pool sank down, forming a passage. Zheshio continued to descend through it. Qin Changsheng shook his head and took off his outer clothes. After confirming that the time difference was about right, he jumped off the cliff. The mountain wind brushed against his face and was smashed to pieces. The water splashed against his face and was smashed to pieces. Before the whistling sound could reach his ears, he was left behind. His speed became faster and faster. In an instant, the cold pool was already right in front of him. There was no sound, only an indistinct feeling of impact and a slight numbness from his face and neck. After a while, he finally felt the pressure and wetness of the pool water around him. Borrowing the force from the height of the cliff, his body automatically descended, breaking through layer after layer of energy barriers in the depths of the pool. The pressure of the pool water increased. Compared to the depth, it was unimaginably great, but it was still within the range that he could endure. Only now did he open his eyes and see in front of him, or in the depths, was Zheshio's figure. Zheshio was lightly swinging his legs. It seemed that he was fine. Then he saw that in front of Zheshio, there was a faint dot of light. In a short while, he and Zheshio arrived at that dot of light, but they did not discover the cave that the black dragon had spoken of. But at this moment, they had no other thoughts. They could only use the remaining force of their fall to continue swimming. Once the force of their fall was exhausted, they began to paddle with their hands. After swimming for some time, they suddenly felt that the pressure of the pool water around them was gradually lessening. Then they realized that the dot of light was gradually growing larger and larger, gradually filling up their entire field of vision. Only now did they realize that the true change had occurred. They were no longer swimming downstream, but upstream. There was a splash of water. They finally swam out. They were still in the water. They broke out of the water. This was a flat lake. The surface of the lake was enormous, and the surrounding forests were verdant and verdant. Some unknown flowers grew on the rocks by the shore. They were in the center of the lake. As it turned out, the depths of the pool was actually a lake. Most mystical of all was that the bottom of the lake was connected to the bottom of the pool, but the top and bottom were reversed. The world had been reversed. Qin Changsheng and Zheshio were both shocked. Soon after, they saw a scene that made them even more shocked. Their mouths were agape, but they were completely speechless. In the middle of the lake was a rock. Right in front of them, a woman was sitting on a rock. This woman had a charming appearance and had probably just come out of the lake. Her entire body was drenched, and her soft clothes tightly clung to her body, revealing her curves and revealing her mature and alluring body. This extremely beautiful woman was currently combing her wet black hair. Her movements were very soft. Her body was very soft. Her brows were very soft. Her eyes were very soft. She was like a fruit that had just ripened, like the mountain spirits that the shamans of the south worshipped, like the beauties in the murals of the capital. To the youth, she was in her most alluring season. This was the most alluring scene. Qin Changsheng thought about what Zheshio had said earlier, but he had no idea what to think. On the other side of the cliff, there really was a lake. In the lake, there really was a beauty that had just come out of the bath. What was this?